Well, I've now covered all the Paper Mario games that have any significant meaning to me. Those first 3 games that I love, Sticker Star, which became my most hated game, and even Color Splash, which even though I avoided it until my review, still held significance to me because of how it connects to Sticker Star. I resented Color Splash because it was a sequel to Sticker Star, and because its existence showed that Sticker Star had a lasting influence. It in turn helped fuel my resentment of Sticker Star. Even though by the time I got to Color Splash that resentment had subsided, it still held significance to me, and finally covering it was quite a milestone for me. That is where this marathon was supposed to end. From the start, I had a rough plan on how I would end it. Plans have changed in multiple ways, but most importantly, another Paper Mario game came out. Paper Mario: The Origami King. When I started this marathon, this game didn't exist. Color Splash was the latest game. When Origami King was announced, I was working on reviewing Super Paper Mario. I hadn't even gotten to Sticker Star, the game that this whole marathon revolved around. So at the time, I hadn't even released my frustrations with that game. I was still angry and resentful about Sticker Star and Color Splash. So the news that another Paper Mario game was coming out was a bit frustrating. One, because that meant I had to extend my marathon, but also because it was now the 4th game in a row that wasn't like those first 2 games. Color Splash already made the original formula a minority in its own series. And now with Origami King, well, let's just say there wasn't a lot of hope for the future of the series from classic Paper Mario fans, at least at the time. Classic fans were furious, as you'd expect. But much like with Color Splash, there was a sizable resistance willing to stand up for it. Actually, there was quite a lot of people defending Origami King. I guess the game being on a system people cared about led to a lot more people being interested in Paper Mario through this game. This is what I think was the lowest point in the Paper Mario fandom, even worse than when Color Splash was announced. The amount of arguing between classic fans and newer fans was way too much that it became unbearable. And look, I am a classic Paper Mario fan. That much has been made abundantly clear throughout my marathon, and I recognize the toxicity that came from my side of the fence. Classic Paper Mario fans went way too far at times with how they treated people who defended Origami King, but the other side wasn't innocent either. Plenty of toxicity came from them. Most notably, in the Resistance, they started targeting the Thousand Year Door. That ranged from just saying it's not as good as we say, to just calling it bad. If you have complaints about the Thousand Year Door, it's fine to talk about them. There are things to complain about. But the only purpose of this was to get under the skin of classic fans, and all it did was fuel the toxicity. The worst part was when the classic fans started promoting Bug Fables, which was a classic Paper Mario inspired indie game that just released. And newer fans started writing it off or calling it bad too, and that is unacceptable. Some people were toxic in how they promoted it, but Bug Fables had nothing to do with the discourse. It was just indie devs making a game out of their own passion for the old games. Look, Thousand Year Door is an old game. No one is hurt if people start dragging it through the mud for the sake of getting back at toxic fans. But I draw the line at dragging indies into this. Out of the entire discourse, this is what bothered me the most. Thankfully, that was just a small minority that targeted Bug Fables, and it didn't stop it from succeeding. The point is, Paper Mario discussion online was intolerable. It wasn't fun at all to talk about the series. Now personally, I didn't engage with all the arguing. I witnessed a lot of it and talked to my friends about it, but I didn't contribute to it in a public space. Honestly, while the fact there was yet another game that didn't go back to what I wanted out of the series did bother me, I was already in the mindset that the series was never going back. So while my resentment for Sticker Star and Color Splash was still there, it didn't really extend to Origami King itself. I just didn't think much of the game, and even if it wasn't like Thousand Year Door, they had changed the battle system again, so even if it wasn't what I wanted, it probably wouldn't be a bad game. A couple of my friends who played it when it came out also really liked it, one of which even ranked it as his second favorite Paper Mario game, right below Thousand Year Door. It wasn't in my mind that Origami King would be bad even before my resentment had subsided. I resented Color Splash, but that resentment left after I covered Sticker Star, and was able to look at it from a neutral perspective. With Origami King, I never resented the game itself, and because the overall consensus was pretty positive, including from personal friends who generally agreed with my perspective on the series, I was actually kinda looking forward to finally playing it. I've heard good things about this game. Of course, the really hardcore classic fans hated it, but that doesn't matter to me. I've accepted that this isn't Thousand Year Door. This is something different. I'm actually kind of excited to try this game, so let's see what all the hubbub is about. Story has always been important to Paper Mario. It's an aspect that's the center of most discussions around the series. It's one of the first, if not the first thing that gets brought up against Sticker Star and Color Splash. Sticker Star had an outright bad story, and while Color Splash did have a lot more to its narrative than Sticker Star, it still lacked greatly compared to the first 3 games. So the worry for each new game is that it will also be lacking in story, and the same assumptions that Color Splash wouldn't have a story were also made towards Origami King when it was revealed. But even when the game was revealed, it had already shown at least a more interesting premise than its predecessors. But having an interesting premise doesn't automatically mean the story will be good or any more complex than what was shown. The game begins with Mario and Luigi driving to Toad Town for the Origami Festival, a festival celebrating origami. Luigi being here right in the intro and talking like he did in the first 3 games is a pretty good sign already. Though this is another game that doesn't start with ahem today and a story being told, unfortunately. But so the brothers arrive at Toad Town already adorned in origami decorations, but with none of the residents in sight. They head to Peach's castle to try and find anyone, and after they enter, Luigi remembers he forgot their gift in the cart, but the door closes behind them. And since option A of finding Mario to solve the problem is obviously not on the cards, Luigi sets off to find the key to this door. Mario continues alone and finds Peach, who has been folded into an origami version of herself. She also talks strangely and asks strange questions like, shouldn't a mushroom kingdom unfold and be refolded unto glory? And shouldn't toads be silenced for all eternity? And lastly, will you crease yourself and be reborn like me? No matter your answer, she opens the trapdoor below you, sending you to the dungeon. Down there, Mario finds a bunch of Bowser's minions who are let out of the room by some origami shy guys. Mario starts hearing a voice asking for help, and by performing a dark ritual using a magic circle, he's able to rescue this origami girl whose name is Olivia from inside the wall. The two of you try to escape together and find Bowser, who has been completely folded up as he witnesses the origami shy guys turning his minions into origami versions of themselves. You eventually find and rescue Bowser and all make your exit, and run into Peach again, who is with one of the origami shy guys. They ask if you will volunteer to be folded up for the cause, and after refusing and defeating some of the folded minions, the shy guy reveals himself to be Olivia's brother, Olly. He declares himself to be King Olly, and his desire is to fold everyone into origami and create a new origami kingdom. Olivia opposes this, which is why he stuck her in the wall. He summons 5 giant streamers that wrap around the castle, forcing everyone to retreat. But Mario and Olivia get separated from Bowser and fall into a nearby forest, and the castle is lifted and placed upon a nearby mountain. One thing I want to briefly point out here is just look at the camera work in this scene. This game is much more cinematic than the others. There's actual cinematography in the shots, actual camera movements that are more than just basic panning and zooming. None of the previous games did stuff like this. Not even Color Splash. It looks really good. Mario and Olivia make their way out of the forest and back to Toad Town, which is being ravaged by these big paper mache Goombas that are called Paper Macho Goombas, which were presumably created by King Olly, or at least his forces. These things bring up some questions. Let's face it, they're flesh golems. They're made up of confetti, which are the shredded remains of living beings. Like how paint was blood in Color Splash, confetti is flesh. These things are flesh golems. What is with these new Paper Mario games and body horror? I mean, what else is it other than body horror when these paper people get folded up into origami versions of themselves? Like, think of the real-world implications of this. And if you think I'm reading way too much into this, just wait, there's more. Anyways, you make it to where the castle used to be and rescue Luigi, who was also stuck in a wall. He still hasn't found the key to the castle, so he leaves to go find it. And from here, the goal is to follow the streamers holding into Peach's castle and destroy them. This follows the usual structure of going to new places, helping out the residents, and putting an end to the villain of the week there, before all the streamers are gone and you take the fight to King Olly. The structure of the story is actually closer to the first 3 games. While it doesn't label them as such, the game is divided into chapters. Each chapter has its own self-contained story, only connected by the streamers and the villain being part of Olly's forces. Color Splash mostly had single-level stories with only a couple chapter-spanning stories, and Sticker Star didn't have a story, so this is a nice return. Now, the individual chapter stories are pretty light on plot, though. You won't have more complex stories about a conspiracy revolving around missing fighters, or a mystery of finding out who the intruder on a train is. The actual plots are pretty simple. It is mostly just searching for the streamer and destroying it. The actual conflict of the chapters can be pretty minimal outside of the fact that there are origami soldiers all over the place. There are toads that need rescuing, and each streamer is guarded by one of the Legion of Stationery who work for King Olly. Chapters 1 and 4 in particular don't have much going for them plot-wise. The narrative of these chapters revolve less around an actual plot, but more around interactions with specific characters and scenarios. The stories of the individual chapters are mostly centered around a specific character. You get to know that character and go on an adventure to help them out while going after the streamer. Chapter 1 is pretty weak because it doesn't revolve around any specific character. There is no central character to the plot of Chapter 1, nor is there really anything else to it. It's simply just following the streamer, fighting the boss, and destroying it. There's not much of interest in between. The only thing this chapter really has is it introduces the concept of the Vellumentals. So the Vellumentals are just kinda casually introduced. Some Koopas want you to get these shell stones that were stolen so the Earth Vellumental Temple can be opened again. But no one asks what a Vellumental is. I mean, the concept isn't hard to grasp. There's 4 of them, each representing a different element: earth, water, fire, and ice. It's just a little weird that the game is like, yeah, the Earth Vellumental. He's pretty neat. When you do get the stones, there is a tourist attraction that tells you about the Earth Vellumental, which says it's a mighty spirit imbued with the power to lift the very ground and some other stuff. It's obvious these things are just powerful beings tied to an element. Just a little weird how they're introduced. I do like how Koopas worship the Earth Vellumental, which is a big turtle. Each of the Vellumentals has been turned into origami versions of themselves, so they're hostile and you need to defeat them. Each one defeated drops a Bibliofold, which allows Olivia to transform into the Vellumentals and use their power. But this is more of a gameplay thing. The Vellumentals don't really have much of a story presence. And they aren't exclusive to Chapter 1, there's only the Earth Vellumental here, and each of the next 3 chapters has its own Vellumental, so Chapter 1 doesn't even have that as something to set it apart from the others. The other chapters mostly have a lot more going for them, though that does depend on the chapter. Either way, all of them are better than Chapter 1. Chapter 2 is when the game really picks up. In fact, Chapter 2 is a whole other beast to talk about. I'm gonna save that for its own section. So let's skip to Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is one of the only chapters that has a conflict beyond just when you run into the boss. But it's pretty understated and no one really seems to care. The desert is shrouded in darkness because there's a hole where the sun should be. But aside from noticing that when you enter the chapter, it's not really brought up again. There's a town you visit, Sniff City, a seemingly abandoned settlement built on top of ancient ruins that a bunch of Sniffets have taken residence in, but no one there really cares about the missing sun. So instead of being about fixing the sun, it's just about searching for the streamer again, which is buried under the sand. And you figure out how to get to it with the help of this chapter's signature character, an archaeologist named Professor Toad. His name is Professor Toad. Yeah, we still don't have names for toads or any other existing Mario species. Every toad is just Toad again. There are 3 Captain Toads in this game. 3! And none of them are the Captain Toad. This is ridiculous. Why is this standard? This is not something you could get away with anywhere else. Imagine any other RPG or hell, just any other game by anyone else where there's an actual important character with no name. They're just referred to by their species. Like when you play Mass Effect, it's not Officer Turian, his name is Garrus Vakarian. Doesn't have to be a big RPG. When you play Sonic, it's not Dr. Human, his name is Ivo Robotnik. Hell, bringing it back to Nintendo, when you play Zelda, it's not Chief Goron, his name is Darunia. Doesn't even have to be a story-driven game. In Donkey Kong 64, you don't meet Big Kremlin, his name is K. Lumsy. Can you imagine watching Lord of the Rings and the members of the Fellowship were dwarf, elf, wizard, man, hobbit, and hobbit? This would be considered awful writing anywhere else. Why is it acceptable here? So you know what? Screw it. If Nintendo won't give their characters names, then I will. This here is Professor Dus T. Yeah, bringing back the first 2 games' Toad naming scheme for him, and all other Toads I'll give names to. So Dus T is an archaeologist and professor of ancient studies. You first hear about him while visiting Sniff City for the first time. Some of the residents mention a toad with a weird hat that booked a room in the hotel. When you investigate the hotel, you find the room he was staying in, but he's not there at the moment. Though you do find his archaeology log, which reveals that he's here trying to uncover the secrets of the Ancient Ones. Little is elaborated on what the Ancients are other than they are the people who lived in this region in the distant past, but he's found an ancient treasure that he believes could help with his research, something he calls sun incense. You can just get one in the hotel. The receptionist gives it to you for free because he felt bad about upcharging Dusty for one before. But now you use the log to retrace his steps, and using the incense on this altar, a giant pokey flesh golem appears. And after defeating it, you rescue Dusty. He was attacked by this thing when he used his own incense. After you rescue him, he tells you about how he's dedicated his life to studying the ancient civilization of this desert. He's able to read their language, which is written all over the structures in the desert, which you need to uncover the way to reach the streamer. He also wants to find a legendary ancient that is thought to still be alive. This figure is known as Captain Teod. Everyone agrees that if they work together, they can solve the mysteries of the desert and find a way to the streamer, and potentially find this Captain Teod, so Dusty joins your party. This is actually the second instance in which another character joins your party since I skipped over Chapter 2, but yeah, essentially you get partners in this game. Like previous games, the partners are usually the center of the story of the chapter they're introduced in, though here they don't follow you for the rest of the game. After this chapter is over, Dusty remains in the desert. There's a reason people liked the partners of the first two games. Well, many reasons, but the relevant one is they added another character with their own unique personality to interact with, and flesh out the story of the chapter they're in. And even though there aren't as many here, and they only stick around for that chapter, they do add to the story in much the same way as those first two games. Dusty is a pretty fun character, if not the deepest or most complex. He's very passionate about archaeology and old stuff in general. He's a bit of a coward, but he's still willing to put himself in dangerous situations to find what he's looking for, although he draws the line at fire. He kinda reminds me of Colorado, though he's less clumsy and reckless. Aside from being eaten by a cactus, he doesn't eat dirt the way Colorado did. I will say Colorado is a more memorable character, but Dusty is pretty good as well. After the streamer is destroyed, you do end up finding the legendary Captain Teod in a block of ice and set him free. This is Captain Teod. Teod. I'm not going to rename this guy because even though it is still just a play on Toad, this is still kind of a name, and one kind of similar to the Toad naming scheme of the first two games. Congratulations, we have a Toad with a name. But after all that, now that Dusty has the legendary Captain Teod, a living ancient right in front of him, what does he want to know? How he likes his coffee. Brilliant. Chapter 4, as I said, doesn't have much going on for it with its story, and it has very minimal character interactions. Captain Teod, along with the Sea Captain Toad, who I'll be calling Sol T, are kind of your partners for this chapter. I say kind of because they don't really act like the other partners. They don't follow you around and instead staying on the boat. You're sailing across the Great Sea, visiting various islands, figuring out how to access the sea tower where the streamer is. You've met Sol T before and sailed a bit briefly, but you can't go far because of a thick layer of fog all around. Teod has a chart that can lead them to an island that is able to dispel the fog, but he requires his submarine, the Merino, before he'll help you. After this point, there's not much of a story to this chapter. Teod and Salty are technically the partners of this chapter, but they don't relate to the story other than they offer their boat and sub to help you. They'll offer commentary here and there, but nothing on the level of the other partners. Teod is a pretty cool character. He talks in an old-timey way, but there's not much to him beyond that. You don't have many interactions with him, and the most significant ones have more to do with other characters like Dusty. I like him, but I wish there was more of him. We do learn a bit more about his past in Chapter 5, which is cool, but he's not around anymore at that point. Salty is also kinda underused. He doesn't really have an interesting personality. He's overshadowed by Teod, who already is underdeveloped, so there really isn't much to say about him. Story and character-wise, Chapter 4 is weak. There's more to it than Chapter 1, but not by much. There actually are two very significant things that happen in the Great Sea, but both of them don't really have to do with Chapter 4's story. One of which is actually part of Chapter 2, and the other, while taking place in Chapter 4, is more related to the main narrative of the game that could have been placed in any chapter. Chapter 5 does pick up, and it is very interesting as it's all about Bowser's minions. Mario ascends from the sea tower and you end up in... Wait, is this the over there? Did Mario die again? Okay, but you end up in this heaven-themed spa in the sky that you got to by solving some ancient puzzles and tests in the Great Sea in the sea tower. And it's called Shangri Spa. I have so many questions regarding this place, but we're just gonna move past them right now. Bowser's castle has crashed right into the banquet hall of Shangri Spa without a reservation, and the staff are not happy about it. Because of the damages, they've had every imaginable fee charged, and they're all forced to work around the place to pay it off. Bowser's minions are basically forced into slave labor for the Shangri Spa toads, and that includes Kamek. Kamek, we meet again. I've been on record saying I'm not a fan of Kamek, and that mostly comes from Sticker Star. I haven't played many games that have used used Kamek well, so from my point of view, he's just a generic Magic Koopa with no unique traits, whose presence means the exclusion of any other Magic Koopas as enemies, and worst of all in Paper Mario, he's replaced Kami Koopa, who's one of my favorite Mario characters. Again, this is mostly because of Sticker Star, although Magic Koopa enemies not being allowed in the same game as him is prevalent everywhere else he is, and it extends beyond the RPGs. But I know there are good portrayals of Kamek, and I have to admit, Origami King is one of them. Still don't have Kami or any other Magic Koopas like we did when she was around, but at least Kamek is portrayed well here. Kamek is your partner for this chapter, along with Bowser Jr. Shortly after you arrive, Kamek tells you what happened, but then off in the distance, Bowser Jr. flies along trying to defeat the Sumo Bro guarding the castle. But then he's intercepted by the scissors and goddamn, he's cut to pieces. What is with this game and body horror? You know, the body horror comments for Sticker Star and Color Splash were mostly just jokes, but like this game keeps having it. You collect the pieces and bring him to the Spring of Rejuvenation to fix him. They restore him, but he's still dirty and wrinkled, so he can't help them in this condition. And so the rest of this chapter is bringing Junior to all the springs around Shangri Spa so he can help you get to the castle to save Bowser and get to the streamer. Much like the other chapters, the plot is pretty simple, but it's all about the character interactions, and having both Kamek and Bowser Jr. with you gives you a lot of good character moments. Junior is his usual bratty child self, and he bounces off Kamek pretty well. Kamek is pretty much his nanny being overly protective, but also just kinda tired of this crap. And his interactions with Olivia are pretty good too. There's this one part where they get to the Spring of Bliss, which is effective against folds and creases. It helps out Junior, but everyone overlooks the fact that Olivia is origami, so this spring isn't very good for her. She starts unfolding, but Kamek jumps into action and folds her back up. And then there's this jungle where there are multiple forks in the road, and every time they come across one, Olivia and Junior pick a path, and Kamek picks the opposite path. Kamek's path ends up being the correct one every time, and the reason for it is he rejected the emotional choices of the others using facts and logic, which, as Olivia points out, really means she picked the right one every time, since he couldn't have chosen correctly without her having a pick to oppose. 2 games in a row that misuse these characters, making them annoying or just not doing much with them. Bowser Jr. wasn't even in Color Splash, and Kamek might as well not have. And we finally have good portrayals of both of them. Another great thing about Chapter 5 is that it's all about Bowser's minions, even beyond Kamek and Bowser Jr., and how they're characterized. Now, all throughout the game, you do run into a lot of Bowser's minions, and because the origami soldiers are the enemies, they are just NPCs you can talk to. Honestly, if this was your first Mario game and you didn't know anything about the series, you might not even think Goombas, Koopas, or even Bowser are bad guys. And that's something I loved about the older games. They were just another species, like the Toads. They were people, not monsters. Some were bad, but Koopas as a species aren't. Now, they still are all Bowser's minions here, but within that limitation, because there is another villain instead of Bowser, and they are victims of Olly's regime, they are allowed to be people beyond their allegiance to Bowser. They are presented in a very, I guess, human way. They are people. Specifically in Chapter 5, though, it shows more of them as Bowser's minions than just ordinary people, showing a bit more of how they feel about being a part of Bowser's army. Though that's mostly at the end when you retake the castle. Before then, they're being enslaved, and you need to help spark the revolution. I really like Bowser's minions being on your side, or even just being NPCs. Color Splash kinda did it in certain sections where you could talk to some of them, and those moments were great, but there weren't enough of them. And also because they are the enemies and none of them have unique designs, they had to have these speech bubbles over them so you knew they were friendly. You don't need that here because the only enemies are origami, and this is a benefit of having different original villains. Not gonna say much about Chapter 6 right now, but Bowser is your partner for it. And get this, Bowser talks. Sound the alarms, Bowser is talking again. And not just a couple of sentences. Bowser was one of the funniest characters in the first 3 games, but he didn't talk at all in Sticker Star, and only had a handful of lines in Color Splash that were just kinda generic. So it is very, very nice that we finally have him back in Origami King. Well, okay, he's kind of a wet floor sign most of the game, but his mouth hasn't been covered up, and that's the important part. Poor Bowser does not have a good time in this game, though. Before the game even starts, he's already captured, folded up, and forced to watch his minions being turned into origami soldiers right in front of his eyes. And then Mario has to save him, but even after escaping, he's captured again, and his castle is taken over and crashes into Shangri Spa. Even after being saved again, he stays folded up until you defeat the Stapler, which is what he and his minions went through to get like this. But it's great to have Bowser Bowser in a prominent non-main villain role again. His interactions and dialogue are so good again. And we get some stuff here we didn't in the old games, with characters like Kamek and Bowser Jr. being here. We get a bit of insight into how Bowser parents Jr., which isn't a whole lot, but that as a concept is something that doesn't get explored much in any Mario game, so even the scraps of it here is cool. There's not too much to say, but there's a significant improvement to the characters of this game compared to Color Splash, and especially Sticker Star. It really helps that we have chapters that revolve around specific characters again, so we actually spend a lot of time with them instead of just one-off toads here and there. We still get a ton of one-off character interactions, and they're great too, but we actually have stories for the significant ones, and that has been severely missing for a while. But I suppose it's time to get to one specific character I skipped over. So let's bring it back to Chapter 2. We've just destroyed the first streamer and got past the very lacking Chapter 1, in which we didn't have much story and no partner character to accompany us. You can see the next streamer go off to a mountain in the distance, and luckily there's a gondola that leads right over there nearby. You board the gondola, but there's another passenger with you, a Babam with no fuse who says his name is Babam. No, I'm not going to rename him because there is a point to this, but even Olivia doesn't like that no one has names, as she can't seem to remember his name and calls him a few different things before settling on Bobby. Even though he keeps trying to correct her that his name is Babam, I'm calling him Bobby. I remember before the game came out, this scene was in a trailer and people weren't happy about this character introducing himself as just Babam, but again, there is a point to it. So Bobby is the first partner you get. He's on this gondola on a journey to get his memories back. He has amnesia. All he can remember is that he's called Babam. Immediately, Olivia offers for him to join them and help recover his memories and make new ones in the process. Bobby is interested, but he's too polite to just say yes, so he dresses it up like, I couldn't put you two out like that, and that he'd just be in the way. And he tries saying he could be talked into it if they really wanted, but Olivia agrees he made some good points and it would probably be better if he was alone. So Bobby scoots over to actually ask to join them. I love that moment. But of course you accept, and the three of you are off to Autumn Mountain to find the streamer and see if there's anything that can jog Bobby's memory. Bobby is the best partner in the game. The others are fun enough, especially Kamek, but none are as fleshed out as Bobby. This whole chapter is about Bobby's journey with Mario and Olivia as he forges new memories with the both of you. Bobby is also a fun character. He kinda reminds me of Huey in terms of personality, though mostly the chill dude part of it. He doesn't get angry like Huey did, and unfortunately he doesn't yell shenanigans, but he's such a chill guy that you just like having him around. Not a lot of events happen while you're on Autumn Mountain. You're exploring the place, taking in the sights. Bobby wanders off a few times, like in the tall grass, and you have to find him. You find him chilling with a mariachi guy and move on. But when trying to cross this bridge, a flesh golem attacks and knocks Bobby off. You jump down to rescue him. He's fine. He's sorry for getting in your way, but overjoyed at the new memories he's gaining. But it doesn't take long before some rolling chestnuts knock him away again. You find him stuck in a tree and knock him down only for him to roll down the hill. You go after him, but he's not there. He's farther up the path, sleeping on a stump. And when you wake him up, he says he's found a shortcut. He's a bit accident prone and makes you run around to find him, but with his chill attitude, it's hard to be mad at him. As you explore the mountain, you find your way to Shogun Studios, which is completely taken over by the Origami soldiers. But you continue to do what you do and clear them out and make more memories with Bobby. One thing that's kinda lame, and I don't know why they did this, is that Bobby won't follow you into the Water Elemental Temple or the Ninja attraction. There could have just been more moments in those places to make more memories with Bobby, but they just don't. One important thing is, in here there are some flesh golem heads you can collect and wear. Two of them are just cameos of Samus and Donkey Kong, and you get cute scenes, as well as Mario being racist. But the third one, the Goomba one, is important. It's what you use to sneak into the theater past all these enemies, but more importantly, it makes Olivia laugh uncontrollably. And that's pretty much the chapter, just going on an adventure with Bobby and having a good time. You end it at the Big Show Theater where Mario does all the work, participating in the act while Olivia and Bobby watch. After defeating the villain and destroying the streamer, everyone celebrates with fireworks. These fireworks seem to awaken Bobby's memories. He remembers everything, but he doesn't tell us his backstory right now. Though he does say his new memories we made together are his favorite ones. Bobby is about to send Mario and Olivia off, but Olivia insists that just because he got his memories back, that their journey doesn't have to end, and wants him to stay with them. Bobby is so touched, he does continue with them to the very end. Now the group heads over to follow the next streamer, but before they make much progress, King Olly himself shows up. There's a back and forth between him and Olivia, but it ends with him crushing her under a huge boulder. Mario and Bobby can't move the boulder, and they're left wondering what they can do. But then Bobby gets an idea, and he insists that they need to set sail across the Great Sea to save her. He won't tell you what his plan is, but you need to go out to the sea to find a special item. He directs you to this cruise ship, the Princess Peach. The ship is just kinda sitting there in the ocean, and when you board it, it seems abandoned, and that something happened here. You find some toads, but they're too shocked to tell you what is going on. As you explore, you reach the deck, where Bobby just asks how much you know about bob-ombs. He starts talking about how bob-ombs don't live very long, so they try to make the most of it, but doesn't say much more. Eventually, you make your way into the VIP room, where you find this lockbox that Bobby tries to remember what the code was, but before he can, a bunch of tentacles attack and take it away. You go to the deck where you fight a giant blooper flesh golem. Good to see the reoccurring giant bloopers of the series are back. Still not bigger than the one in Super Paper Mario, but I doubt you could reasonably go bigger. After defeating it, it explodes and the rest of the crew are set free, including the captain. The captain is literally just called Captain Toad, but he's not that Captain Toad. He's not important, but I gave him a name anyways. He is Toot T, because he likes to say toot a lot. You get the lockbox back, and Bobby finally opens it, revealing another box. With the important item in tow, you head back to Olivia. But when you get there, Bobby explains some of his backstory. Bobby was traveling aboard the cruise with a bunch of other bob-ombs. They were his friends, and they all pitched in to get the VIP room. But in the middle of their voyage, they were attacked by that blooper. The bob-ombs attempted to fight it, but were unsuccessful, and Bobby was knocked off the boat, with his fuse also falling off. Bobby washed up at Toad Town with no memories, and that's when he set off on his own adventure to find them, which led him to the gondola. The fireworks at Shogun Studios got him to remember his friends in their fight with the blooper. But most importantly, he remembers what's in the box. He tells you about his best friend, also named Bob-omb. Okay, they were definitely self-aware. But his best friend passed away in an accident a long time ago. Bobby kept his friend's fuse to remember him by, and put it in that box. He puts on his friend's fuse, says that to make an impact is every Bob-omb's dream, and thanks Mario and Olivia for the fun time he had traveling with them. And then this happens. Bobby blows himself up to destroy the boulder, and is nowhere to be found after. Mario's thrown back by the explosion, but he picks himself back up to help Olivia. She doesn't realize what happened, wondering where Bobby is, but she puts the pieces together. She is devastated by what happened, and runs away. Bobby is dead. He sacrificed himself to save Olivia. I went into Origami King as blind as possible. I didn't look up any reviews or playthroughs or anything. I managed to dodge a lot of spoilers, but I did know some stuff. I knew a little about Bobby. I knew he was well-liked and that something sad happened to him. I didn't know what happened, but I knew that something happened. I had ideas of what could happen. Him not having a fuse was kind of an obvious clue. And once Olivia was crushed by the boulder, I pretty much figured it out. It was pretty easy to guess that it would be a new fuse that he wanted to get so he could blow up the boulder. I expected this to happen. But what I wasn't expecting was how committed they were to this. You're given time to take in what just happened. You have to explore this cave full of Monty moles to find Olivia while this sad music plays. You're given time to think about it. You find her crying by herself, unable to bring herself to move from this spot, and you're unable to console her. You continue to explore and see the Monty moles have gathered up the debris of the boulder, and as you investigate, you hear Bobby. It's here when it really hits you. This is permanent. Bobby actually died. Here's his ghost to prove it. Paper Mario is known for its fake deaths. No one is allowed to die. Lord Crump and Grotus somehow survived their fates. Tech survived self-destructing himself. Love Beast somehow came back even though she gave up her own body and memories to turn back into a pure heart. Even Kirsty and Huey both made self-sacrifices and just came back anyways. They didn't even let Piper die for real. This has been a very frustrating aspect of these games. No one is allowed to die. No sacrifice can be permanent. We're not allowed to be sad about losing someone because they'll just come back. About the only permanent sacrifice in the series is Lord Blumiere and Lady Timpani, although it's ambiguous what really happened to them. But I'll still give it to Super for that. But still, In general, every death is undone, even in the games that tried to have more mature stories. It was Origami King that actually committed to a character death. Bobby is dead, and he's not coming back. This scene of him as a ghost telling Mario he needs to help Olivia pull through, or his sacrifice will be in vain, is the last we see of Bobby. These are his last words. They don't reverse this. They don't take it back. You don't beat the game and go back to find him just chilling on a stump again. They commit to it. And it's so very refreshing. And the way it's handled too is just so good. And it really comes down to how Mario and Olivia react to it. I was going to do the bit of Mario's still a plank of wood moving on, but then cut it off with Mario running to stop Bobby. But I didn't have a good place to put it with how I structured this. But Mario's reaction, man. I've said it in like the last 3 videos about how good Mario's portrayal is dependent on the situations he's a part of and the characters he interacts with. The last 2 games were very lacking with that, and this game is pretty similar to them for most of it, except for this sequence. Look at Mario as he runs to Bobby. See the horror and desperation on his face as he knows his friend is about to die. Look at this. And afterwards, when Olivia is asking where Bobby is, and Mario can't bring himself to look at her, with his hat covering his eyes, and the way he just sits with her, trying to comfort her. It gets to me. It really does. This is one of the most emotional moments in all of Mario, and it earns it too. And of course, Olivia's reaction to it, from not knowing what happened to just breaking down when she realizes, and Bobby's parting words to Mario being a hint on how to cheer her up. Telling you that laughter is the best medicine, and you know exactly what to do. You bring out the Goomba mask, and it works. She's still hurting, but it's enough for her to be able to move again. Mario takes one last look at the spot where Bobby's ghost was. Olivia never sees it, and they move on to the next chapter. Bobby is a wonderful character. He's not super deep, but they spend the whole chapter getting you to like him, give you this whole adventure, and he really feels like part of the team, and they use that to punch you right in the gut. And this time, they don't apologize. Because of this, Bobby is unforgettable. Without this sacrifice, Bobby would still be a likable character, but he wouldn't really stand out. He'd actually just be another Huey, a likable guy who you could easily have a burger with, but with nothing particularly notable. The partners of previous games, especially the Thousand Year Door, have a lot to them that make them very notable, and it comes from the hardships and scenarios you go through with them. Koops wouldn't be notable without him overcoming his anxieties to go out and save his father. Vivian wouldn't be notable without her being ostracized by her sisters and having to choose between them and the only person to respect her. Bobbery wouldn't be notable without his story about how he lost his wife and his will to set sail. And Bobby wouldn't be notable without his sacrifice. Now, you don't need some tragic event for a character to be notable. Most of the other partners don't have that, but you get my point. Bobby would be nothing without this, and your time together wouldn't be as special. In Shogun Studios, there's a shop where you can get your picture taken in different poses and costumes, but you can't do this until you've destroyed the streamer, which as soon as you do that, you're forced into going into the next area. You can go back now, and this will be the only opportunity you have to get pictures with all 3 of you. If you go a little further like I did, you'll lose Olivia, and you can't get her back until Bobby's sacrifice. I got these pictures with just Mario and Bobby, not Olivia, and that didn't feel right. You can get your picture taken again, but the new one will overwrite the old one. And I didn't want to get rid of those pictures of Bobby to get ones of Olivia. It's not fair. It's kind of cruel for the game to deny you the chance so easily to get all 3 of you in the same picture. But I did cave in and took new pictures with Olivia. And this is what happened. Bobby may be gone, but he's still with us. Now, this is all well and good, but there is some stuff to criticize here. Nothing that really takes away from this being the best part of the story, but there's some stuff that could be better. Notably, the placement of this is strange. Bobby is the first partner you get. It's weird that they have the first partner be the one to die like this. This does not happen to the other partners at all, and because he's the first, it gives this weird precedent that the rest of the game doesn't follow up on. The game doesn't get you comfortable with having partners before killing one off. I'd think it'd make more sense for you to have already gone through a couple chapters with other partners to set your expectations of what partners are like, before they hit you with the twist of one of them permanently dying. Like, what if chapters 2 and 3 swapped places, so you already had Dusty as a partner, and also if chapter 1 had a partner as well, though it should have regardless. But imagine that. You've had 2 partners come and go with nothing bad happening. You've already gotten into a formula with partners, and you won't be expecting anything sinister to happen, and then boom, Bobby dies. I think that would hit even harder than it already did. But the way it is, the first partner you get dies, and now you're looking at the next one like, hey, Dusty, you, doing okay, pal? Feeling well? It's just an odd way to pace the game, and might set some wrong expectations going forward. Another thing that could have been done better is that while this sequence is done really well with showing the impact, letting you linger on it for a while as you explore the cave and find out how to get Olivia cheered up, after you leave this cave and go to Sandpaper Desert, that's kind of it. Bobby is out of the story. Olivia doesn't talk about this again aside from mentioning his name along with everyone else at the end. And this one scene where you're boarding Bowser's airship. As you're preparing for war, a bunch of bombs approach you and Olivia starts freaking out, wondering how Bobby survived and how there's so many of him. And one of the bombs says something similar to what Bobby said to Mario, about how all any of them can hope for is to make an impact. He even talks a bit like Bobby, calling Olivia ma'am. He also says they do their jobs and when they're done there's always another bomb to take their place. And this is an interesting concept that I wish they explored more. There's this idea that bombs are made for this role, and all they care about is fulfilling their purpose, and that's also why they don't have names. They're meant to be disposable, but this concept is just brought up and then dropped. And parts of Bobby's backstory are also weird, like if they're just meant to be disposable ammunition for Bowser, why was he and a bunch of them able to go on a cruise? But whatever. This is why I think it's okay for Bobby to just be a normal bomb instead of having a unique design, even if they don't explore the concept as much as they could. There's at least an interesting idea to be fleshed out. Another thing to address is how this whole thing is inconsistent with how bombs are in previous games. Mainly in the first two games, bombs, or at least friendly bombs, can explode as much as they want and won't die. You use Bombette or Bobbery to blow up a wall or enemies and they come right back no problem. You can't even say it's just for gameplay. The big cannon they use to shoot you to the moon uses a bunch of bombs exploding to launch you, and afterwards they show all the bombs are okay. So it is part of the lore that explosions don't kill them. But Bobby here dies instantly. I've heard people think that inconsistency takes away from this moment, and I can kinda get it, but bombs have always been inconsistent with this. Depending on the game, bombs can be mindless machines or living people. I like how the bombs were portrayed in the older games, but I take it on a case-by-case basis. What would be best for the story? Mario never had tightly knit lore, and if we were to care that much about it, it'd be maddening with all the contradictions. I mean, we're already having to suspend our disbelief with the world and everyone being made of paper, and I really don't want to get into the whole book world nonsense again. Bombs exploding being a one-and-done thing serves the story well enough, so I don't think it's an issue that it's inconsistent with the first two games. It wouldn't be the first thing that's inconsistent with these new games. But all in all, Chapter 2 has the best story in the game because of Bobby and his sacrifice. This accomplishes something nothing else in the game, or even the series, managed to accomplish. And even some slight issues or weird aspects don't take away from one of the most emotional moments in the entire franchise, and I think that's worth celebrating. So one aspect I've neglected to talk about with chapters are the villains of each one. As I said, there really isn't much conflict in these chapters that come from these villains. The conflict of Chapter 2 is primarily trying to recover Bobby's lost memories, and then to save Olivia from the boulder, for example. There's a small connection between the villains and the main conflict sometimes, and they are all guarding the streamers, which is your main goal. But most of the time it doesn't even come up until you reach them. They rarely directly interact with the main subjects of the chapters, those being the partners. The villain of Chapter 2 has nothing to do with Bobby and doesn't interact with him at all. You could say the giant blooper is more the main villain of Chapter 2 than the actual villain guarding the streamer. Hell, the boulder is a bigger antagonist. Some are better than others. A couple do have some cool ways of interacting with the main story or characters, but only a couple. The chapters being mostly disconnected to the main story isn't an issue. Thousand Year Door did that a lot, but Thousand Year Door had villains for each chapter that caused or were heavily involved in the central conflict and story of their chapters. Origami King isn't going for the same story structure with its characters. The villains of them aren't as important, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing. You can tell good stories without a specific villain, and they do that here. But it does leave these villains to feel a bit insignificant in the grand scheme of the story. They still have their own qualities to them. They're not like Sticker Star's bosses or anything. Okay, but let's get into what these villains are. They are the Legion of Stationery, a group of, things. They really took one of the worst mechanics introduced in Sticker Star and made them the bad guys of each chapter. Honestly, best use of things, that's pretty funny. Okay, but specifically, as their name implies, they are various stationery, tools used in papercraft. The things in previous games felt really out of place because they were just a random assortment of everyday objects that for some reason exist in this world of paper. But here it works a lot better because they are stationary. They have to do with paper. And because they are an invading force, it makes sense that stuff like staplers, hole punchers, or scissors would be the bad guys in a world of paper. They are thematically appropriate, unlike the things in previous games. Now, their motivations aren't elaborated on. Why they're working for Olly is unknown, though I guess he could have just offered them the opportunity to wreak havoc on the paper people, and maybe they just already don't like them, so they would be eager to do it, but that's never explained. And it's also odd that Olly would recruit them, but that's for the Olly section. Other than literally being a legion of stationery, we never really know what the Legion of Stationery is or what their goals or motivations are. They also never communicate with each other, so we don't know how they would interact. The main point I'm saying is that they just kind of exist as boss characters and don't add a whole lot to the story other than some thematic significance, which is also questionable. This combined with the fact that most of them don't have much to do with the conflict of each chapter aside from presumably leading the Origami soldiers in each area and some stuff they do at the end of their chapters, is why they're not all that interesting as villains. But they do have one saving grace. They each have their own fun personalities. They are all one-note caricatures, but they ham up the little screen time they have in some entertaining ways. Also, they are surprisingly expressive for just being normal tools. So first up is the colored pencils, or should I say Jean Perry Colored Pencils the 12th. Colored Pencil's one and only trait is that he's an art snob. That's pretty much it. He's got plenty of funny dialogue, but that's all that boils down to. He's stationed at the Overlook Tower, and he's drawn all over it, as well as launched pencil missiles all over the place. A bunch of toads are trapped inside, but that's about it. The rubber band is a bit more involved because he's taken over Shogun Studios and trapped a bunch of toads to the chairs at a theater to force them to watch this play he insists he's the star of. Obviously, he's an actor who thinks he's the best, and his dialogue consistently references stuff like that. Another fun personality, but that's about it. The Hole Punch is next. So he's also mostly not directly involved in the chapter until the end when you get to the Temple of Shrooms. He is responsible for removing the sun, which should be significant, but no one really seems to care or be affected by it. So it doesn't really matter. But aside from that, he has some cool stuff going on, and there's really good foreshadowing for him. So you enter this place and find a bunch of zombie toads all missing their face. Even more body horror. This game won't stop. This scenario in any other game, not in a paper universe, would be so much more gruesome. You eventually make your way to a dance floor where the Hole Punch, who hasn't been revealed yet, threatens to remove the DJ's face if he doesn't put on some music he can really dance to. He's very particular about his music taste. That and dancing is his personality trait. You help out the DJ by finding the right music, but he wants more dancers on the floor before he'll come out. So you use the boombox to play the music and round up all the faceless toads as they'll follow the music. And after a dance number with them all, the Hole Punch emerges and damn, who would have thought a hole puncher could break down like this? I like the Hole Punch, he's great. One-note character like the rest, but this whole sequence is great. And there's actually a little more going on here. All these toads were actually the previous residents of the town those sniffets were occupying. Shroom City is what they called it before. And after you rescue them, they all go back, which you'd think would cause some conflict, but the cool thing is that they don't kick the sniffets out or fight over the town. They manage to get along and coexist with each other. I really like that they're all chill with each other with no conflict, and the toads embrace the new stuff the sniffets added to the town. It's a cool conclusion to the story. All this put together does make the Hole Punch probably the best one, and the one with the most effect on his chapter. Next one though is probably the least significant. Tape. So there's no trace of him in the entire Great Sea. The only thing he does is tape a bunch of toads to the side of the sea tower. That's it. I guess those toads were part of the passengers of the Princess Peach? Maybe? But it's not as interesting as the toads of Shroom City. His personality is fun though. He talks like a mobster and it's great. Hey, I'm elevating here. He's probably the funniest, but that's all he has. The Scissors is another one of the most involved ones, and does interact with your party directly early in this chapter. He's taken over Bowser's castle, and when Bowser Jr. tries to attack, the Scissors intercept him and cut him to pieces. This does directly cause the conflict of having to help Bowser Jr. by bringing him to the springs. That is good, but you don't get more until you get to him in Bowser's castle. Kamek and Bowser's minions all rush ahead, and when you follow, oh god. Oh my god. This is just a hallway full of mutilated bodies. You can't even deny this. That's literally what it is. And look at this thing. I wasn't joking. These things are flesh golems. This one is made up of people's faces. This game has a fetish for body horror. So yeah, the scissors butchered Bowser's minions and made a flesh golem out of them. Yes, this is a Mario game. No, this is not a horror game. This alone makes Scissors one of the most memorable ones, and he hasn't even said anything. I mean, he's not the most interesting one personality-wise, he just talks up his own skills and is very overconfident. Oh, all of Bowser's minions are fine after you defeat him, but it's still the most gruesome thing to happen in any of these games. But then there's one left, the Stapler. He's the least interesting one personality-wise, simply just because he's a dog. That's it. What is interesting about him is he's actually the first one you see, though only his shadow, all the way at the beginning of the game. He's the one that creates the Origami soldiers. So in a way, this is the most significant one, as he's caused all of your enemies' existence. And this includes Bowser. That's why he can't unfold himself all game. He's been stapled. Once the Stapler is defeated, then he's free. Now the Stapler is interesting mostly in how he relates to Olly, which I'll get into in a bit. The Stapler itself doesn't have much else, and because he doesn't have a personality, there's not much else here. The whole bunch in Scissors have good roles and add to the conflicts of their chapters, but they're not much of a presence before you get to the end, and the rest of them don't do much. Really, this is only an issue for chapters 1 and 4 because they don't have much else going on, so having a more active villain could fill that gap. Again, Hole Punch and Scissors add a lot to their chapters, and while the Rubber Band doesn't do much, his theater sequence is good, and we have all the Bobby stuff for the rest of the chapter, so there isn't a void in the story. They are all entertaining characters, at least even if they're one note. And I guess they're better than the villains of Color Splash and especially Sticker Star. Some of them would beat some individual villains in 64, but not much else. They're good, but some could be better. Alright, it's time to get back to the main plot. Let's talk about the two most important characters. Starting with our protagonist, Olivia. Much like Tippy in Super Paper Mario, Olivia really is the main protagonist over Mario. And hey, for once we have a companion character that doesn't feel like they just used Goombella as a template. She doesn't have that sass or attitude that Goombella, Kirsty, or Huey had. Instead, she has a very genuine naivety to her. She's really sweet and is always nice to everyone around her, but her knowledge of the world and certain social cues is very limited. She'll misinterpret things or just not understand something, but she's never rude about it. She's just a very nice and pleasant character. Not quite the chill bro that Huey is, but still burger-worthy. While she does go through some hardship, including that her whole quest is about stopping her brother, she doesn't really develop much as a character. From the beginning, she's dead set on stopping Olly's plans, and that never changes. She tries to talk him out of it, but knows what must be done when he doesn't change his ways. But there's enough here, enough interactions with other characters and events, that her not developing much isn't an issue. It's like Huey, where he has no development while also in a game with barely any story, so he ends up not having much to make him stand out. Olivia has great moments and interactions with the world and characters. Like the whole Bobby story involves her a lot, as she's mainly interacting with Bobby. And then of course getting crushed by the boulder and having to deal with the grief of losing Bobby. Nothing like that happens to Huey. Olivia's a great companion, and it's no competition that she's better than Kirsty and Huey. Now, compared to Tippy is a harder one. I'd say she has a more fun personality to Tippy, but obviously Tippy's story importance is, huge. I'd say they're pretty on par. It's kind of refreshing having a character like this, and while she isn't a complex character and doesn't develop that much, she still has a lot of importance to the story, mainly through her brother. King Olly, the titular Origami King, is our main villain. Right off the bat, it's nice having a new villain again that isn't just Bowser. The black paint doesn't count. This alone makes the story more interesting, as you won't immediately just know what the story is. There's actually a mystery in who Olly is and what his motivations are. The stakes are also higher since it's more than just having to rescue Peach. Also, it frees up Bowser to have a much more interesting role. He was good in 64, but him being the side joke character or on your side in Thousand Year Door and Super is much more interesting. No matter what I say after this, know that I do appreciate Olly for being an original villain. That all being said, Olly is kind of a weak villain. He's not without his merits, and the problems arise at the end of the game. He starts out pretty strong. He has an intimidating presence to him, and that is his strongest suit. He's kind of like Grotus in that aspect. And his goal adds to that. He's trying to turn all of the paper people, with an emphasis on toads, into origami. At first it might sound silly, like, yeah, we can't have the bad guys do something really bad in this kid's game, but it's much more sinister than that. First off is the intrinsic body horror of it, like, imagine having your body folded up like this. For people made of paper, this has to be a very terrifying and outright violating process. Your own body being forced into this form against your will. And we also see the staplers used to turn Bowser's minions into origami origami, and it's framed as this horrible thing. But also on top of that, the origami soldiers are brainwashed to follow Olly, so he's essentially turning them into his slaves. You know, I spent quite a bit of time in the Color Splash review talking about themes of rejecting conformity and celebrating uniqueness. How the black paint's goal was to paint everything black and thus erasing everything unique in favor of everything being the same. But honestly, that theme can apply to this game as well, probably even better here. King Olly's goal is to force everyone else to turn into origami, to conform to his will. It's even more literal. He's literally shaping people into his desired form, stripping away what made them who they are, to become what he wants them to be. I'm not about to retread that whole theme section from that video. Honestly, most of what I said there can apply here. But this game is less flawed in that regard because it does a better job at having unique characters to show the uniqueness we should be celebrating. There are still ways in which it could be done better, and actually Bobby being just a normal Bob with no name, but embracing what makes him unique, embracing Bobby as a name, could have worked really well if they played into it a bit more. There's more potential here, but just by default, it is kind of the same theme as Color Splash, but more literal in some ways, and with less flaws. Getting back on track, the opening introduces Olly and the threat he proposes really well. We get this whole intro section to build up the mystery of what's going on and the horror of what is happening to Bowser's minions. And of course, fighting Origami Peach and just how eerie this is. We get to see his power and what makes him intimidating, and how he can't even be convinced by his own sister to stop what he's doing, to the point he trapped her in a wall for opposing him. This all works well to set him up as a villain. The intimidation, the display of power, the mystery around his true nature and motivations. All good things shared with Sir Grotus and Count Bleck in their introductions. But after this point, he's just kind of gone from the plot until the end, except for a couple instances. We don't have intermissions where we see what the villain is up to, so we don't get a lot of Olly for most of the game. Now, the first time he shows up after the intro is great. It's when he appears in Sweet Paper Valley to block your progress. There's a back and forth between him and Olivia, nothing we really haven't heard before, just Olly being racist and Olivia telling him to stop being mean. Origami and flat paper can coexist. But this leads to him crushing Olivia with a boulder, which leads to Bobby's sacrifice. This is kind of his Sammer Kingdom moment. Not quite as shocking in the sense of, well, there a whole dimension got erased, and there was this big sequence of having your time wasted leading up to not being fast enough to save everyone. But it's more personal because this leads to Bobby sacrificing himself. Olly's actions led to the death of a good friend, something that deeply hurts you and Olivia. Again, it could have been better if they dwelled on Bobby's death for longer, and it came up more often, but still, this is a great moment, not just for how shocking and emotional it is, but it also gives you more reason to hate Olly, to want to stop him. His actions led to the death of Bobby. He killed your friend. So far, Olly is doing pretty well as a villain, but things get a bit shaky after this. In the middle of Chapter 4, you come across this house. When you explore the basement, you find a room full of origami with a big origami castle in the middle. Olivia reveals this is her home. She was born in this room. She also says that it was her brother, Olly, who folded her. Luigi asks who folded Olly then, if she was created by Olly. And upon searching the walls, you find the origami craftsman, who I'll be naming Craft T. Craft T is an origami enthusiast. He loves origami and was the one who created Olly. He was preparing the big origami castle in the center of the room for the origami festival, and it would have had Olly and Olivia sitting on top of it. They weren't real though, and he wanted Olly to be truly unique, so he used a secret origami technique, the fold of life, to bring him to life. But for some reason, Olly was angry with Craft T and trapped him in the wall. After this, he created Olivia, and then took off with Craft T's best origami making tools, which presumably are the Legion of Stationery. So we have an origin for Olly and Olivia, and sort of an idea where the Legion of Stationery come from, though that is still questionable. The time frame is a little weird. It sounds like Olly turned on Craft T immediately, which sounds like he was already planning on attacking everyone, but he first created Olivia before setting out. Not sure how long the two were together before Olly attacked. They are siblings, but it doesn't seem like they had much time to form a relationship with each other before all this happened. Also, it's weird how at the beginning Olivia's surprised that Olly was behind this when she knew what he was doing and tried to make him stop before, which is why he trapped her in a wall. It's all a bit weird, but we do have an origin for them. The more interesting thing is that this establishes that there aren't normally origami people. Olly and Olivia only exist because they were created with the fold of life. There's some other stuff of note, but it's not quite relevant. You next see Olly when you finally made your way to Peach's castle. You run into Origami Peach again, and she kicks you out before the castle itself refolds into a life-sized version of the Origami castle Craft Tea built. You make your way through the castle and eventually reach Olly in the throne room. You see Peach has been attached to the wall. Actually, let's talk about Peach for a moment. Peach doesn't get to do much, and it is a bit disappointing. Right from the start, she's already been folded, and the way they use folded Peach is cool in setting the atmosphere and making things pretty creepy, but they don't do much with her, and in the end, she's just a wall. It's still a better role in Sticker Star, but when the first 3 games had more interesting stuff for her to do while also contributing to the story, this is kinda lame in comparison. If they took this concept further, that would be one thing, but you don't get enough of her for that to be the case. She does just kinda end up being a damsel again with nothing much added. But back to Olly. He's confident that he's already won, saying you took so long it's too late. Olivia notices that there are hundreds of origami cranes around the room, 999 in fact. He's attempting to use the 1,000 cranes technique, where if you fold 1,000 origami cranes, you'll be granted any wish. He has one left to make, and he intends to fold you into it, and use the technique to turn every one of those wretched toads into blank paper. Wait, that's a bit odd. It's not to turn everything into origami, but instead essentially genocide toads. He just hates toads and wants to get rid of them. He even says, if you've seen one toad, you've seen them all. They're all the same to me. That's why I have to turn them all into blank pieces of scrap paper, so I never have to see a single one of their stupid faces again. Oh my god. They made the villain a classic Paper Mario fan. All those years of bitching about generic toads paid off. I'm in a Paper Mario game.
That's me. He's talking about me.
Honestly, I'm not even mad in the slightest. This is hilarious. After 2 games of mostly generic toads that people like me complained about endlessly, they make the villain of the next game hate toads. That's amazing. That can't be an accident. There's no way they didn't know what they were doing. I also find it funny that they're making fun of classic Paper Mario fans for complaining about toads, but as I'll get into later, this game actually has designs for quite a few toads. It actually tried this time. So they're making fun of us while also seemingly listening to our criticism. Again, I'm not mad. I actually love this. And it is the best part of his motivation, because aside from that being funny, this is where Olly kind of falls apart as a villain. So he hates toads, and the reason for this is because of Craft Tea. So what did Craft Tea do? According to Olly, he scribbled on him when making him.
That's it?
After defeating him, you see that Craft Tea drew on him. It was a message that Olly apparently doesn't know what it says, and asks Olivia to read it. It says, "Dearest Olly, may you grow into a fair and kind king." After hearing that, Olly realizes how terrible he was, and tells Olivia to fold him into the last crane so she can make her own wish. Olivia doesn't know how to fold a crane though, but Luigi bursts in with Craft Tea, Bowser Jr., and Kamek. Craft Tea teaches Olivia, and she does just what Olly wanted her to do. Her wish is for all the origami folded by Olly to be undone, and with that, the cranes fly off, and do just that. Peach's castle is restored, all the folded soldiers are presumably turned back to normal, and of course Peach comes back. But Olivia is missing. She also disappeared because she was also folded by Olly. And yeah, Olivia doesn't come back. We've actually had a second death. It wasn't just Bobby. Olivia dies, and her death isn't undone. The Origami Festival goes on as planned, everyone is celebrating and having a good time, and Craft Tea is able to show off his origami castle. There's a post-credit scene if you 100% the game where he places origami replicas of Olly and Olivia on the castle. Mario reminisces about Olivia, and the game ends with everyone letting loose a lot of lanterns into the sky. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. So I knew going in that the ending of this game has been criticized a lot. I heard a lot of people say this ending was awful, and well, it's got some weird stuff about it, but I don't think it's that terrible. Olivia sacrificing herself is odd. I think the game did enough with her to earn her sacrificing herself, and I like that this game was willing to do this twice. The problem comes with how it happened. It only happened because she worded her wish really poorly, and it really felt forced. She wished for all origami folded by her brother to be undone, which would include her, but she could have worded it in so many other ways to get the same result without sacrificing herself. Honestly, she could have just wished for the castle to be brought back to normal. The folded soldiers shouldn't be an issue anymore because they were created using the stapler. and after that was defeated, all the staples disappeared. So that is already taken care of. Maybe just wish for all the Toads and Peach to be restored? Or just undo all the damage he caused? I don't know. Actually, does she even need to use the cranes to restore the castle? What's stopping her from unfolding it the same way Olly folded it? Doesn't she have the ability to do that? She's been able to turn herself into the elementals and other stuff, even folded Bowser. Whatever. The point is, from a thematic perspective, I think having Olivia sacrifice herself is fine, but they could have handled the process better. Also, what's stopping Mario or anyone else from folding 1,000 cranes and wishing for her to come back? Or, well, wish for anything, really. Bowser went out of his way to steal the Star Rod and the Royal Stickers to wish he was more powerful, but now he knows he can just fold 1,000 cranes for the same result. How many ways are there to grant wishes in this series? Alright, but now for the bigger thing, Olly. Olly has a good intimidating presence, but his motivation is why he's a pretty weak villain overall. He's evil and racist against Toads because Craft T drew on him. That is really it. Now, there is some extra context for this in real-world origami culture. I was told this by a friend, and I'm not super knowledgeable about it, but apparently in origami culture it's frowned upon to use any tools when creating origami. You're just supposed to fold paper and that's it. You're not supposed to use staplers, tape, hole punchers, scissors, rubber bands, or pencils. That's why Olly is so mad that his creator wrote on him. He disrespected the art of origami by doing this. I could see what they were going for with this. The problem is this isn't something the average person will know, and the game doesn't delve into origami culture to teach people. Craft T would be the perfect character to teach you this, but that's also strange, because he's the origami enthusiast, but he wrote on Olly even though you'd think he'd know not to do that. Actually, the Legion of Stationery came from him. They were his tools, and he even has a book about using these tools. Perhaps Craft T could have been more open-minded about origami and not followed a more strict way of doing things, but that's not explored at all in the game. At no point is it ever talked about that tools shouldn't be used in making origami, or that it's frowned upon, until Olly complains about being written on. Hell, even when Olly complains about it, he never talks about how using tools is wrong, just that he felt being written on disrespected him. But as far as we're concerned, that could just be a personal thing rather than an origami cultural thing. Because the game never delves into the concepts of whether or not using tools for origami is fine or disrespectful, it leaves Olly with a very weak motivation for his actions, and it just makes it feel lame. Olly's motivation is lame, and it does take a lot away from him as a villain. Now, the idea of the villain having this extreme of a reaction to something so insignificant could have been done well, but they don't really play into this being such an overreaction. It's not treated like this is a really stupid and petty reason for genocide. Another thing that is really weird is the Legion of Stationery. We're gonna ignore how it's never explained why they're sentient, or giant for that matter, despite apparently just being Craft T's tools. I'm more concerned with why Olly recruited them. His whole motivation is because a tool was used on him when he was created. Shouldn't he hate these things? Yet he uses them to create his own army. Maybe it's like he's using them to get back at the people who used them on him. Like they don't deserve to be properly folded. They deserve to be disrespected by being stapled into origami. But this is not supported in the game at all. Nothing is ever said about this. Olly isn't called out for being a hypocrite, and really, it's only the stapler that he uses. The other ones wreak havoc, but Olly only uses the stapler to make his soldiers. Also, he only does this to Bowser's minions, not the Toads that he hates so much. All of the Toads are folded normally because you can easily unfold them with your hammer, unlike the soldiers who are stapled and thus can't be unfolded so easily. Why wouldn't he use the stapler on the Toads as an act of disrespect to them if he hates them so much for using the tool on him? They really did not think through Olly's motivations for this. Like, it feels like all these problems could have been solved or even added a lot to Olly and the story as a whole if they actually talked about it at all. I can't even really say some of the possible explanations I've given as subtext, because there's next to nothing in the game to imply any of it. And this does kind of leave a sour taste on the end of the game, and Olly as a character. There are good things about him. He's got a good intimidating presence to him. Him intervening and crushing Olivia with a boulder which leads to Bobby sacrificing himself is an excellent villain moment, but it falls apart in the end. It is funny how he's just a classic Paper Mario fan, but that doesn't really help his character. That aspect almost feels like they wanted to make him a joke villain, but every other aspect feels like you're supposed to take him seriously, so it just doesn't work. This ending does kind of get worse the more you think about it, but I still don't think it's awful. It's got problems, but it doesn't ruin the game or the story. So that's the main plot out of the way. but there's still some other aspects of the story to talk about, like the world itself. Making a compelling world that feels like a real place has been a struggle for these new Paper Mario games. Color Splash was a big improvement over Sticker Star, but it still didn't reach the first 3 games. The worlds of the last 2 games were segmented through a level select. Again, Color Splash improved it in a number of ways to make it feel more like a real place in spite of the segmentation, but still they were separate. Origami King goes back to the first 2 games by having a fully interconnected world, and in a way it's even better than those as it doesn't cheat by using warp pipes to get to each chapter. You can walk to each area with no warp pipes or level select in between, so the world feels connected. But we also finally have multiple towns again. Most of the areas you go to have some kind of town, like Shroom City or Shogun Studios or Shangri Spa. The world feels the most lived in since the first 3 games. Even though Toad Town is kinda basic, it feels much more lived in than Dekelberg and Port Prisma. It's full of people and has a bunch of houses, so there's places for them to live. Also, throughout the game you can find cafes. They're in some odd locations, but they're nice to chill in. They don't serve much of a purpose, they just give some flavor text and help connect more with the people of the world, which lets you care more about them. Now, your interactions with the people are a bit limited since there's no real side quests or side stories. Pretty much all meaningful interactions with the residents of this world is through the main story. We don't have any stuff like Piper and his group of friends in Color Splash. And this is an advantage Port Prisma has over Toad Town, even if it's a small advantage. It has more people living in it, but you had more interactions with the people of Port Prisma, both during the main story and optionally. But Origami King still has a lot more going for its world. Another big thing that makes this world feel more real is it actually has some cool lore and world building. The last 2 games didn't have much of any lore or world building. There was a tiny bit in the Enigma Mansion, but that was this big outlier in general in Sticker Star. And while Color Splash did improve a lot with its story and world over Sticker Star, to be frank, it had pretty poor world building. I mean, the big paint stars, and paint in general, are supposed to be very important to the people and culture of Prism Island. But we're not really shown that outside one flashback where the Toads are playing with paint, and we know pretty much nothing about the big paint stars themselves. They talk, but don't have much to say about what they are, or why they're important. We don't even get to know much about Huey. He was apparently made to be the guardian for the paint fountain. We don't get any elaboration as to who made him or anything else. It's just kind of thrown out there. This all takes away from Prism Island feeling like an actual place when the centerpiece of their main town, that you think would have dictated the culture of the entire island, has like no lore to it, nor does it really visibly change much with its absence. Origami King is much better at lore and world building than Color Splash. Now, the world building surrounding the significance of origami culture and stuff like that is poorly done, as I already went over. At least the origami people and soldiers are explained unlike the black paint, so that's an advantage over Color Splash. But where it does shine is with the chapters themselves, specifically in how chapters 3, 4, and 5 connect. Chapters 1 and 2 are more self-contained, but these 3 chapters all have an interesting connection. And it's with the Ancients that Dust T has been researching. The Ancients were just the residents of the desert from a long time ago. We don't get too much info on them in Chapter 3, but we do find one frozen in a block of ice, T.O.'d. One cool thing is he's foreshadowed right at the beginning of the game if you go to the museum because the Super Marino is on display. But Chapter 4 is all about getting into the Sea Tower, but to do so you have to follow all these statues with hints, and eventually find yourself facing some trials to be able to get there. This is all connected to Shangri Spa. These trials are meant for those deemed worthy to get into Shangri Spa. Might not be the best business decision having your customers sail across the sea to solve riddles and trials just to get to a spa, but they also acknowledge that they haven't had a customer in a long time. But the cool thing that ties all these chapters together is this miniature of the Super Marino. This Toad tells you about it in some other lore. This sub was actually the Spa Marino, and they used it to escort their guests to the trial. T.O.'d stole it and renamed it the Super Marino, which is why they've not had guests in so long. They can't bring anyone to the trials. T.O.'d then used the Marino as ransom in exchange for King Shroomsy's crown. King Shroomsy's being the king of Shroom City in the desert, and he was also a major spa enthusiast and visited Shangri Spa frequently. Shroomsy's was angered by T.O.'d and had him captured and frozen, which is how he got here in the first place. This all connects and explains a bunch of small stuff. It justifies the trials in the Great Sea, it explains where the Marino came from, and how T.O.'d got frozen in the desert. It pays off a lot of stuff they set up pretty early. Even looking at the Super Marino, it has a Shangri Spa Toad symbol on it. That's some good foreshadowing and internal consistency, and it also retroactively makes T.O.'d a much cooler and more interesting character. This is some great stuff here, and like, Is this the same team as the last 2 games? We have lore and characters that span 3 chapters. Like, what? Remember when there was some mild world building in the Endgame Mansion and that was a big deal for that game? This just makes the world so much more interesting than the last 2 games. And that really helps with making you care about it. Having the world be more fleshed out means you care more about it, and will care about what the villain's plan will do to it. Even if Olly's motivations is weak, he's still a threat, and you want to stop him even more when you care about the world and how he will affect it. This is the kind of good storytelling we haven't had since the first 3 games. These new Paper Mario games have been very focused on comedy, to the point where that's pretty much exclusively what the writing was oriented around. Sticker Star and Color Splash didn't have much in the way of drama or emotion. They didn't care about world building or character arcs or telling a story. Now, they weren't completely devoid of all those things. They did try in areas, especially Color Splash, but it was never an important aspect to the writing. They just wanted to be funny, and they were, well, Color Splash was. And that is a strength of Color Splash. It is a very funny game, rivaling the funniest moments in the first 3 games. But that's all that game really had. Origami King does try to be funny most of the time, just like the previous games, and it does succeed. This game can be damn hilarious when it wants. It's probably not the funniest game in the series, but it does have some great moments. A lot of the Toads in Toad Town have some great lines, like this one about streamers not having the best reputation lately, or this Toad next to the broken bridge wondering if there's an expert on bridge experts around. That's a good Color Splash callback. In Chapter 1, one of the shell stones needed to enter the Earth Elemental Temple is being sold by this guy for a ridiculous price, 10,000 coins. This is definitely outrageous, but you can haggle, and you can haggle a lot. Every time you say don't buy, he reduces the price. And after the first couple times, you gotta know how low it can go. He keeps lowering it over and over again until you get it down to 300 coins. And if you say no again, the 3 Koopas here, who each have 100 coins, pool their coins together and buy it themselves. Now you lost out on getting it for 300 coins, and you have to pay the Koopas 1,500 coins. This was pretty funny. Kind of reminiscent of one of the few good jokes in Sticker Star, and for reasons. Losing out on the cheapest price isn't a problem, so it just remains funny if you over-haggle. One of my favorite moments is when Kamek is telling you how Bowser's castle crashed into Shangri Spa. He was about to engage their emergency protocol as he's standing next to 2 buttons. He hits the button on the right, which shuts off the engines, causing the castle to crash, and he says it wasn't his fault. When you rescue Bowser and are about to attack King Olly with him, you have to push the button Kamek meant to push, and these buttons have signs on them. The one on the right says, in big red letters, secret weapon, but under it in small letters it says, is the button on the left. And of course the left button says in big red letters, cut engines, and below it in small letters is the button on the right. That's just so good. At first it's just, oops, Kamek hit the wrong button like an idiot, but then you get to see this and you can see why he made that mistake, and now it's like, who designed this? Good setup and payoff for this joke. And hey, remember Luigi? Remember how Luigi was often one of the funniest parts of the old games, but he was barely in Sticker Star and Color Splash? Luigi finally has something to do. He's not just a cameo, nor does he only appear at the end. His role is more like the first 2 games. I'd still say his adventure in the Waffle Kingdom was better, but this is still pretty good. So you're with him at the start of the game as you visit the castle, but the door locks behind you and Luigi goes off to find the key. Even after the castle is taken away, when you save Luigi, he continues to look for the key, and he'll keep appearing throughout the game claiming he's found it, but it ends up being a different key that you need, and he gets really frustrated every time. I love the time in the Great Sea where he's just chilling here all satisfied that he thinks he got the key this time, and every time Olivia's just like, how do we tell him? And so at the end of the game, you make it to Peach's castle, and the door is locked. Luigi appears all depressed because he couldn't find the key, but it was stuck in his cart the whole time. Oh, this. I missed this. Luigi actually having a funny, no, legendary role again. Been a while, Green Man. But Origami King has more to it than humor. It is actually trying to tell a story. So we do have that drama, that emotion. We have world building. We have characters that go through arcs. We have sincere and somber moments. We have time to reflect on past events. The writing is able to be so much more because there's a greater narrative that they want to convey. There are still issues. As mentioned, Olly's motivation and the excuse for Olivia's sacrifice could have been handled a lot better. And while some characters do have arcs, others don't. Dusty is a fun character, but he doesn't really go through any development. Same with Toad. But we still have something. We have a narrative. A story that they're actually trying to tell us. One they've put effort into, and even if it doesn't reach the heights of Thousand Year Door or Super Paper Mario, I can appreciate the genuine effort and care put into it. Origami King, in many ways, is a return to the narrative focus of those first 3 games. Paper Mario fans have been frustrated by the new games not having much in the way of a story, but regardless of what you think of the actual contents of Origami King's story, you can't deny it has one. You can't say it didn't try, because it did, and while it may not have in every aspect, I say it succeeded overall. Welcome back, Mario's Story. Whew, that was a lot. I was able to stretch out the story sections of the last 2 games despite them barely having one, but it's nice that it took a while covering it here because there actually was a lot there to talk about. Alright, let's get into the visuals. This game continues with the full-on paper aesthetic of the last 2 games, and we've been through this song and dance before, so let's just skip the part about how important paper was to the originals, and just talk about how well the game pulls it off. Sticker Star was limited in how well it could portray a world made of paper and cardboard, but it still did it well. Color Splash didn't have such limitations and made a beautiful world that I didn't think had a lot more room to improve. Like you'd expect to start seeing diminishing returns, but Origami King improves it so much it makes Color Splash look primitive. It may not be a huge leap in actual graphical fidelity, but the ways they improve the art style in big and subtle ways elevates it so much. One thing I didn't really think about with Color Splash is that almost everything in the world was cardboard. There wasn't much paper specifically, it was all cardboard. But Origami King uses paper in addition to cardboard in much more creative ways. Example, trees. Look at Color Splash's trees. You've got a cardboard box with holes cut out, and it looks fine. But then, look at Origami King's trees. First, you have these pine trees with cut out pieces of paper for the leaves. Even the trunks are coiled up paper. But then over here in Picnic Road, the leaves on these trees are shredded up like bits of paper arranged like this. And they use different styles for each kind of tree. Like look at the Autumn Mountain trees, or the Chestnut Valley trees, or just all the foliage in the jungle. Like you didn't get anything half as creative in Color Splash. Look at this jungle compared to the woods in Color Splash. Night and day. Actually, just look at the grass. You have sheets of construction paper on top of the terrain and blades of tall grass that are torn pieces of paper. Oh, the tall grass in Autumn Mountain. Just look at this. How do I even describe it? You've got multiple layers of paper on top, and then the edges of the grass have torn pages standing up. And the wind effects, just look at this. And the water. I gave props to Color Splash for having an ocean made of cardboard. But the water in Origami King. Oh, the water in Origami King, where do I start? They use paper in different ways depending on the kind of water. Like the still water of the spring doesn't have much going on outside of the edges. But moving water like this has pieces of torn paper on top, moving with it to show motion. And they use that in multiple ways. But then you have the Eddy River Rapids, which has so many layers of paper to simulate how it's harder to see under the water when it's flowing so fast. And it keeps getting more and more added to it. And then you get these whirlpools. Just look at this. There is so much going on with the water in this part. It's insane. And then there's the Great Sea, which also uses layered pieces of paper in a different way to represent such a large body of water. And how are the devs of Sticker Star capable of such creativity? Look at this whale. Look at this whale. This might be some of the most impressive water in any game I've played. And it's made of paper. Character design is still the same as Color Splash. They still have the white outlines, which, as I've said before, I'm pretty neutral on, but it is disappointing they didn't try to do anything with them being cut out pieces of paper. Unfortunately, they didn't go in the direction of this Color Splash concept art. They even took away the slight effect that was still in the game, but it makes sense as paint is no longer a focus. Your hammer is now a 3D object, so they couldn't really do it anyways. But it would still be nice if they did go in that direction. Having different kinds of cutouts for different characters has a lot of potential, but oh well. But there is one aspect to character design that was dramatically improved: the origami characters. Because this game is all about origami, you have origami enemies. There are origami versions of all these Mario enemies, and I'm pretty sure you could actually make these yourself. And this includes bosses, and they finally matched Hooktail from Thousand Year Door. They finally used paper in Paper Mario as creatively as Hooktail, and it only took them 4 games to do it. But here we go. We have big origami bosses. Finally, a big origami dragon instead of a flat sheet of paper. What I'm trying to say is this game is gorgeous and fully justifies the complete paper aesthetic this series has been going for since Sticker Star. For the world theming, we're well past Sticker Star's uninspired borrowing from New Super Mario Bros. There are some standard themes, but they're still more visually distinct than New Super Mario Bros. Or Sticker Star. Sure, Chapter 1 is a grassy area, and it is the most standard and boring of the chapters, but it still has some unique stuff to it, such as the tower you ended on. Also, this has the most distinct Vellumental Temple, as it's been converted into a tourist attraction by the Koopas who worship it. Chapter 2 is where it starts getting really good. This chapter is beautiful. As the name Autumn Mountain implies, it's in perpetual fall, and goddamn does an autumn atmosphere hit hard. And this is just the first half. Then you go to Shogun Studios, a big Japanese-themed amusement park full of gift shops, ninja-themed minigames, and a big training area. And of course the main attraction being the Big Show Theater. Chapter 3 is the desert, but this is one at night. Or well, technically the sun is missing, but whatever, it's a desert at night. Night deserts are so underrated and underutilized. And here, the sand is colored purple under the night sky, and it looks so cool and unique. Desert themes don't have to be so boring like the new Super Mario Bros. Games. You can do cool stuff like this. And then there's Sniff City, which is such a cool town. You have ancient ruins that have been taken over by Sniffets and converted into a resort, with the central palace being turned into a big hotel. Man, Sniff City is such a mood. Might be one of my favorite towns in the series from an aesthetic level at least. Unfortunately, after you beat the chapter, the sun is put back and we no longer have a nighttime desert. No more purple sand. But for the majority of the time you're there, it's at night. While chapters 2 and 3 are big highlights here, the rest of the areas aren't a slouch either. We've got the Great Sea. While it doesn't have the misty and spooky vibe of the Lost Sea from Color Splash, you've got a vast ocean you can freely explore with many islands and this underwater temple. And of course Shangri Spa is such a unique setting, being a heaven-themed spa up in the clouds on floating islands. Even King Olly's castle is pretty unique and makes a lot of use out of origami. So time to talk about character design. This has been a problem in these new games, having all the NPCs be generic and without unique designs. Color Splash did it a little better, but was still very flawed. And in Origami King, we still have this problem. So many toads that all look the same. And now Bowser's minions are all friendly, but they still have this problem. All Goombas, Koopas, and any other minion look the same. It's not surprising, but still disappointing. Am I saying that every toad or every NPC should have a unique design? You know what? Yeah. Why not? Other games have done it. Other Nintendo games have done it. Indie games have done it. You think they are incapable of it? They can do it. They just choose not to. Yeah, the first 3 Paper Mario games didn't have unique designs for each NPC, but there were so many ways it did have unique designs. And they'd even have regional designs like the Desert Toads or the Rogueport Toads. There was room for improvement, and these new games have actively gone backwards from that instead of improvement. Now, despite it still being a problem, Origami King has actually improved a lot over Color Splash. It's actually pretty close to being on par with Thousand Year Door. Yeah, every toad that is an actual character has a unique design. Yeah, sometimes that design is glasses or a backpack. But also, some of these designs would fit right in Thousand Year Door. Toads like Dusty, Crafty, and Captain Toad are exactly the kinds of designs we've been wanting. Like, look at some of these guys. Now, this is primarily just toads, but there's this group of Bowser's Minions cosplaying in Shogun Studios, and they're great, though they're the only ones. There's still stuff missing like hair. Toads in the first 2 games could have hair, but not anymore. If they don't want to give Toads normal hair anymore, why don't they at least do something like Toadette? Although speaking of which, we still don't have any female Toads, or hell, just any female NPC or characters outside of a few. Like you have Peach, Olivia, Birdo, these trees, and this Chain Chomp who's also named Princess like the one in Color Splash. Like, I think at one point someone from Nintendo said Toads were genderless, but ignoring how the first 2 Paper Mario games contradict that, as well as Toadette, and the fact that they're all always referred to with he/him pronouns, if that's what they want, they should just be based about it and say they're all non-binary. Anyways, except the lack of hair and women, the designs we do have are largely good and what we've been wanting. And another thing, the regional toad designs of the first 2 games are back. While most toads are the generic kinds, the staff in Shogun Studios as well as the Shangri Spa toads have designs specific to their region. Also, the Shangri Spa toads have white spots. We once again have more than just the 5 default colors for toads. So yeah, we're almost back to the Thousand Year Door standard. Almost. Some more improvements and we'll be there. Though again, I'd like to exceed Thousand Year Door rather than just settle with being on par. Moving on to the music. Okay, let's get this out of the way. Thousand Year Door and Super Paper Mario are still my two favorite soundtracks in the series. Super in particular is one of my favorite video game soundtracks of all time. I like the more electronic style of them. It's very much more to my taste, and probably had a part in shaping my taste. I've listened to them for most of my life, and know pretty much where any track is played in those games. I love them so much, and it would take a lot to personally overtake them. And none of the new Paper Mario games have done that. Okay. Now that that's out of the way, Origami's King soundtrack is fantastic. It's similar to Color Splash in a lot of ways, but more tracks stuck out to me than Color Splash. We've got a good variety of styles to match the themes of the areas. And much like Color Splash, because of the more inspired theming, they are able to evoke a feeling matching the mood beyond just what the basic theme is, like desert. Now, Color Splash was divided into levels instead of one big connected world, and each level had its own music to it that gave that individual level its own identity. Origami King is back to the interconnected world of the first two games, but it still has a massive soundtrack, and each area has multiple pieces matching the theme of the individual areas. So we have a style for the whole chapter rather than the levels having their own individual style exclusive to them. They put a lot of effort into this soundtrack. And one of the most impressive things, which is something more RPGs should do, is that each chapter has its own version of the battle theme. They are all arrangements of the same theme, but they fit the area they are in, and it's so nice. The Chapter 3 battle theme in particular is really good. Sticker Star and Color Splash were very light on story, so they didn't have that much really emotional music like the first three games, and especially Super had. But Origami King does have more of a focus on story, and has some really emotional tracks to match, a lot of which comes from Bobby. It just tugs on your heartstrings. Actually, this track that plays when he's telling you about his past, it's really reminiscent of Memory from Super Paper Mario. It's not exactly the same, but it's so eerily similar that I find it hard to believe it wasn't deliberate. And of course, the music that plays after Bobby's sacrifice, as you look for Olivia in the mind, it's just, It's really nice having emotional Paper Mario again. Speaking of Super, King Olly has his own memorable theme, like how Count Bleck did. And just like Bleck, it has multiple versions for when he appears. Man, an actual motif that the villain has that is reoccurring. Like, this didn't happen in the last two games. Like, all you had was the final boss music to go with Bowser and Bowser. There is so much music I could cover. This is a huge soundtrack that is really good all throughout. Way too much to highlight. So let's get through some of my favorite tracks. Sniff City is so good. This might be one of my favorite town themes in the series. The vibes of this place is immaculate. The boss music is great, but my favorite is the Hole Punch theme. Oh man, the Origami Castle music. Like, talk about a climactic final level theme. This feels really fitting for storming the final boss's lair. Like, do you even remember Black Bowser's castle? It was okay, I guess, but this is miles better. Although some of my favorite music comes from Chapter 2, Shogun Studios competes with Sniff City as potentially my favorite town music in the series. But even just the normal music in the first area is so damn good. And then there's the battle theme. We already have unique variations of the battle theme for each chapter, but in addition to the Blue Streamer battle theme that already plays in Chapter 2, there's another one just for Autumn Mountain, and it's probably my favorite track in the game. God, that's so good. This soundtrack is wonderful. I've got no complaints at all. I still have my preferences, but damn does this go hard. We're off on a pretty good foot here. There are some hiccups, particularly with the story, but a genuine effort has been made, and the presentation is top-notch with nearly nothing to complain about. So let's see how the gameplay holds up. The trailers for Origami King weren't nearly as much of a red flag as Color Splashes. It was still pretty similar to Color Splash with its on-field gameplay, but that wasn't an issue with that game. Honestly, there's not much to even say regarding your moveset. It's exactly the same as Color Splash down to the 360-degree hammer swinging. Beyond that, the main concern, of course, is the battle system. So, how is it here? We've had 2 games with a really good battle system, one game that threw that out to have typical platformer combat with some tacked-on RPG elements, and then 2 more games that brought back turn-based combat, but did it very badly. Well, it's time to forget everything about all that, because they changed the battle system again to something else completely different. Aside from Super just not having turn-based combat, this is the most different of them. The main deviation from previous battle systems is the fundamental change in what core skill is being tested. Whereas in the first 2 games, the battle system was about strategy, and while Sticker Star and Color Splash tried to take away all strategy from battling, it still technically was about strategy. Origami King's battle system is about solving puzzles. Here are the rings. The battle system revolves around these rings. You have 4 rings made up of 12 panels. You can rotate any of these rings or slide the panels up or down. The mechanics of the rings are just that simple. The one annoying thing about them is that when selecting a ring to rotate, hitting both up and down on the analog stick moves the highlighted area outward. There's no way to move inward. Get used to the rings, you'll be interacting with them throughout the game, even outside of battling, but they are most prominent in battle. The battle system is just a ring puzzle. When you enter a battle, you are presented a group of enemies that are spread across the rings, and you have to rotate the rings and slide the panels to line them up so you can attack all of them. The solution to these puzzles is to line enemies up in one of 2 formations, either in a straight line or a 2x2 square in the center of the rings. In both cases, you're lining up 4 enemies together. You need to line them up in either formation because you can only attack in either formation. You have 2 types of attacks, jump and hammer, but they work differently than usual. Jumps go in a line, like how the line jump or multi-bounce worked in previous games. You jump on all enemies in a straight line. Hammers hit all enemies in a 2x2 radius. You still have action commands, and they work the same as Color Splash, though the jump acts like the line jump. And thankfully, the hammer has the same visual as Color Splash, making it easier to time. For every 4 enemies, you'll have an additional attack, so you can attack everyone as long as you solve the puzzle. If you don't solve the puzzle, you'll not be able to attack every enemy, and they'll get to attack you. You can still guard against their attacks like the last 2 games. Though if you're playing well, that won't be an issue, as the battle system is designed for you to wipe out all of the enemies on your first turn. This part is important and has a lot of ramifications for pretty much every other aspect of the battle system. For one, it makes first strikes pretty meaningless, since, as always, it only damages one enemy, which gives you no advantage. You'll just line them up with the full health enemies and wipe them all out in one shot anyways. And if you are in a situation where your attack only kills a weakened enemy, congratulations, you still have 3 more enemies you didn't kill that need to be lined up again. The only use for first strikes is if you're strong enough to skip the battle with the first strike. It works like the last 2 games where as you get health expansions your base damage increases, and if that damage is enough to kill an enemy, it defeats them right there. Thankfully it actually tells you about it this time. But anyways, that's the basics. Line up the enemies in the appropriate positions so you can attack them all. Sounds simple, but there are some factors that complicate it. In addition to a pretty restrictive time limit, you have a limited amount of moves you are allowed to make to solve the puzzle, the most being 3 moves. The more moves you have, the more complicated the solution is. When you only have 1 move to solve the puzzle, it's pretty easy, but having 2 moves can make the solution tricky to find, let alone having 3 moves. The puzzles start out simple enough, but by the end of the game they can get pretty tricky. A lot of the difficulty can come from overthinking things. Many times I was struggling on the solution only for it to be much simpler than I was making it out to be. But some can just be complicated and it does get tough. The added pressure the time limit gives you can make it hard to think through it, though it does have a good difficulty curve. There's not standout parts where the difficulty spikes. It starts pretty simple and gradually gets more challenging. In the first chapter, the enemies will start lined up before scattering, showing you what the solution looks like. But chapter 2 onward, they start scattered. And I don't know if it was because I was just getting better, but I felt it was a little easier to solve the puzzles when they didn't show the solution at the start. It was probably because you have less time to figure out the solution before the fight begins. You have a few seconds where it shows you all the enemies before the timer starts. That time is taken up showing the end points, so you don't have that time to think how you'll get them there. Many times I figured out the solution during this period before you can even do anything. Now there is some stuff here that could make battles easier. You can ask Olivia for a hint. Her hints aren't very helpful and they repeat the whole game, so it's weird that this is even here. But this is very useful for something that I assume is unintended. While she's talking, the timer is paused, which lets you take your time thinking of a solution. You can't move the camera or move the enemies while this is happening, but it is still pretty useful. But for intended mechanics, there is an audience in the battles. They don't work like the Thousand Year Door audience, but they do have a function. You can spend money to have the toads in the audience help you out. They can attack enemies, which isn't very helpful since they do so little damage. But if you spend over 100 coins, they will solve the first move of the puzzle for you. I never paid over 200, but I think if you do, they'll do 2 moves for you and 300 for 3. You can only pay once per turn, so be careful not to underpay. It can be easy to let go of the button at the wrong time. This is very helpful. Some of these puzzles can just leave you stumped, and that timer makes you rush, which makes it harder to solve, even some of the simple ones. Though if you really just want to solve the whole thing yourself, and it's taking too long, you can continuously pay coins to add more seconds to the clock, which is also very helpful. Now after you solve the puzzle, you have to attack the enemy. As I said, you have a jump and hammer depending on what formation you lined the enemies up in. But as the game goes on, the enemies get stronger, so you won't be able to defeat them in one turn. That's where weapons come in. There are different weapons you can equip to use in battle. Weirdly, you have to have them equipped to use them, but you could just freely equip whatever weapon you want in the middle of a battle, which kind of makes it pointless. Why not just let you choose from everything you have? Anyways, they are just more hammers and boots that mainly do more damage, with a few having different properties. Iron jumps can jump on spiked enemies as usual, and hurl hammers hit in a straight line rather than the normal hammer formation. So it's just another iron jump basically. I really question the need for a hammer that hits the jump formation. It doesn't offer anything the iron boots don't. And there isn't a jump that hits the hammer formation. There are gold hammers and boots which give you more money when you use them. I like those. And lastly, there's also fire and ice hammers which do elemental damage, which isn't something that really matters anyways. I don't know why they bothered with the elemental hammers. Your goal is to defeat all the enemies in one turn. All that matters is damage. The elemental hammers don't have stronger variations, so why use them over flashy hammers? Only normal hammers, boots, and iron boots can be shiny, flashy, and legendary, which is the strongest, not the elemental hammers. Also, for some reason, hurl hammers can only go up to shiny, but shiny hurl hammers are as strong as the legendary weapons. They are equal to legendary iron boots. Why do they exist? Anyways, the only thing stopping you from just using the weapons is that they can break over time. Your attacks being consumables was a big problem in the previous 2 games, but it's handled much better here. For one, you always have your default attacks, so you're never in a situation where you're defenseless. But also, instead of being a one-use item, they have durability, so they're like the weapons in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. You can get a good amount of use out of them before they break. Now while the weapon system is much better than the sticker and card systems of the previous games, it honestly is kind of pointless. The whole battle system is designed in a way where if you solve the puzzle, you are able to defeat all enemies on your first turn. If you aren't defeating enemies in one shot, you're not doing it right. Having the battle continue past the first turn is a punishment. It's not about strategy, so adding on multiple weapons with different stats doesn't really add much to the battle system. The point of having different weapons in other games is to give you a sense of progression. You'll get stronger weapons that make dealing with enemies easier. But that doesn't really work when by default you're supposed to one-shot all enemies, and new weapons are only there to keep you at that default when the enemies get stronger. Stronger weapons don't make fighting enemies faster, they stop fights from taking longer, and thus it makes getting new weapons not very exciting because you're not gaining any advantage over the enemies, you're just keeping the status quo. The weapons aren't needed. The battle system would have worked fine without it, and really it would have worked better. They seem to want to keep an element of strategy to battles, but it doesn't mesh well with the puzzle design, at least not their attempts. The weapons don't ruin it, but there are small things about it that take away a little. Enemies still don't show their health, which wouldn't be an issue without weapons because you're supposed to one-shot them. But because they do have HP that you can't see, you'll have no idea what weapons will work or not. Testing weaker weapons to see if they work so you don't waste durability on your better weapons isn't very interesting, and often leads to fights dragging on more when the enemies are stronger than you thought. Now it's not as bad as wasting stickers or cards as they aren't one use, and by the the end of the game, weapon durability doesn't really matter. You'll have enough legendary weapons or enough money to buy enough legendary weapons to carry you through the last chapter, but it's still unnecessary. The only part that kinda makes sense with weapons are the bosses, as you can't one-shot them, so doing more damage actually means something. But they already have ways to increase your damage, so really just tweak their HP a bit and you won't need weapons. Again, the weapon system doesn't ruin the battle system, but it's a whole unnecessary layer to the combat that would have been better off not existing. You also have standard consumable items as well. There are mushrooms, which as always are healing items, and thankfully you can use them outside of battle this time. 1-up mushrooms act like life shrooms, reviving you if you die, and they show the 1-up next to your health so you always know when you have one. You can only have one 1-up on you though, which is fair enough. It was easy to stock up on life shrooms in Thousand Year Door and pretty much guarantee you'll never die. The rest of the items are attacking items. There's not a lot of them, just fire and ice flowers, tails, and POW blocks. Honestly, these are pretty pointless as well. The fire and ice flowers just act like jumps, they hit all enemies in a line, and the tails work like hammers. But they are one-use items instead of weapons with durability. They don't offer anything unique other than, I guess, the elemental effects of the fire and ice flowers, but again, elemental damage doesn't really mean much anyways. I guess if you really don't want to use any durability on your weapons, these can be helpful, but like, there's not really any scenario where that really is the best option. I rarely even used these items. Most of the time it was just to have footage of them. And even then I made a separate recording just for it so I wouldn't have to scrounge through hours of footage to find the couple of times I used them. The only item that has a unique purpose is the POW block because it hits everything, which can actually be useful as it allows you to damage everyone even if you fail the puzzle. It doesn't do a lot of damage though, and it doesn't have a stronger version like the other items, so it is limited in how helpful it is, especially later in the game where this will not kill anything. But at least it has a purpose. But outside of the healing items, the attacking items are a pointless addition that don't add anything to the battle system, and they're even more pointless than the weapons. Let's quickly go over some miscellaneous elements. As standard for the series, enemies are wandering around the overworld so you can see them and avoid them if you wish. If multiple enemies are close enough together when you initiate a battle, they will jump in and start a wave battle. Wave battles will play out like normal, but when you beat all the enemies, a second group of enemies will take their place. It is nice to be able to combine battles so you can fight enemies faster instead of having separate battles. There are some places in previous games where this would be very convenient. Your partners also contribute to battle. Don't get too excited. It's odd that they even do at all with how little they add to it. You don't always have a partner with you. Chapters 1 and 4, you don't have one at all. And even in the chapters you do have one, there are sections where they stay behind. I don't know why this happens. Also, the partners don't stay with you after their chapters, so you can't have multiple partners. So here's how they work. They will automatically do an attack after your turn if there are enemies left, each partner having a stronger attack than the last. Bobby only attacks one enemy, but the rest of them will attack 4 enemies. They have a chance to fail their attacks as well. Not sure what the percentage is or if it's different depending on the characters. For some reason, Bobby is the only one who will telegraph if his attack will land or not. If he's asleep at the start of the battle, he will miss. For the rest, you'll have no idea. Their inclusion is bizarre. The battle system is built in a way where if you solve the puzzle, you can end the fight in one turn. The partners only attack after you do. I suppose they act as a safety net if you're unable to solve the puzzle or don't do enough damage. And that is helpful. You can purposefully use your default attack instead of a weapon to save durability and have your partner take the enemies out. Though you do have the risk of missing, but a risk versus reward aspect isn't bad. Bobby though can only attack one enemy, which is only very situationally useful. I did have some of those situations come up and it did help, so he's not useless. But they are niche uses, and generally he's not helpful. It's just there's so much of the game where you don't have them, and the way they're implemented feels pretty tacked on. Honestly, I'm not sure how to best implement partners into this battle system without a significant overhaul. They're just not necessary, and for story reasons they can't always be with you, which limits their potential. Maybe if Olivia had some kind of mechanic around defeating leftover enemies, they could have expanded on that so you could have it the whole game instead of only when a partner is around. But whatever, they don't detract from the battle system and they do allow for some strategy and saving durability, so that's nice. Running from battle is still the same as Color Splash. You have to hold the button to run, but that's really the only difference. It's still up to luck if you actually run, and that's still annoying. It seems like your chances of successfully running are lower as most of my attempts didn't work, and I never ran on my first attempt. Maybe I was just unlucky though, as I didn't try to run much at all because battles are actually worth it this time, and a lot of the time the solution was obvious, so might as well just do the puzzle. Even in those situations where I didn't feel like solving the puzzle so I tried to run but failed, after the enemy's turn they rearranged themselves and the new puzzle was much easier to solve, so might as well solve it instead of trying trying to run again. And battles are actually worth it this time. Your only reward for battles is coins, still no experience points, but money is actually a good incentive in this game. There are more things of use to buy, and they can get expensive, so fighting frequently is helpful. You can get hundreds of coins from battle, depending on how you perform. You get coins for simply defeating the enemies, but you get extra coins for not taking damage, and for solving the puzzle. There are a bunch of different enemy types, but they hardly change anything. Since the battle system is based around beating them in a single turn, if you're playing well, the enemies will never attack. Even when they attack, it doesn't change much. You take some damage, and that's it. The way the enemies attack makes little difference. Maybe the timing of when you need to guard may vary, but that's it. Some enemies have unique properties, like spiked enemies you can't jump on, but you just use an iron jump if they're in the jump formation. You have flying enemies that you can't use your hammer against, but because of that, the solution to the puzzle is always getting them in the jump formation, so that's irrelevant. Koopas will go in their shell and can be kicked like usual, which is the only time first strikes mean anything, but you'd still be jumping on all enemies in the line anyways, so it's redundant. I guess if you wanted to save durability on your weapons, that would help, but Koopas are weak anyways and can be taken out with the default jump. And I can't really think of a scenario where this would be an effective strategy. The only important difference in enemies is how much HP they have, which, once you have a good supply of the strongest weapons available, becomes irrelevant. The battle system is designed to beat all enemies in one turn, so the strongest available weapons will always do just that. So it only matters if you're trying to save durability, or just testing weaker weapons to find out if they're strong enough. There are only 3 enemies that bring any significant changes to battles. Boos will turn invisible during the ring phase, meaning you have to memorize where they are and solve the puzzle while keeping track of their positions. This is a pain in the ass, but it is something that changes the mechanics of the rings. Piranha plants will go underground when you're moving them, which also makes it so you can't see them. But since it's only while you're moving them, they're just an easier version of the boos. Like, it would make more sense for them to be swapped as the boos come sooner. And the last enemy is the Lil Cutout Soldiers. Not the big ones, they're just normal enemies. The small ones. The Lil Cutout Soldiers are connected, which makes it so you can't slide any of the columns they're on. But when you rotate the ring they're on, they merge into one. This is an interesting idea, but without being able to slide, it makes the solution easier. Flawed execution aside, this is something the game should have done a lot more of, having enemies that change the way you engage with the rings. Forget the weapon system and the slight changes specific enemies have. This is how they should have varied battles. The weapon system does so little to change battles, just selecting a stronger hammer or jump to make it so you don't have another turn. The various types of enemies don't change anything but what weapon you select, which makes no tangible difference. The only way the battle system evolves is in the ring puzzle, the layout of the enemies and what order you need to move the rings to line them up. That's where the challenge and interest comes from, not selecting a stronger attack. The enemies should affect the rings to make more varied and interesting puzzles. And not just the enemies, but everything else. The weapon system should interact with the rings instead of only coming into play after the puzzle is solved. That's where the faults of this battle system lie. Instead of playing into the strengths of a puzzle-focused battle system, they tried to add on some RPG elements for previous games even though they don't complement this new system. This isn't a bad battle system by any means. The flaws hold it back from being the best version of itself, but they don't ruin it. The battle system is the most contentious aspect of this game, which isn't a new thing for these newer games. But for Origami King especially, the battle system is the main thing that seems to determine if you like or hate this game. The battle system in Sticker Star and Color Splash is awful, but it's easy. Anyone can just power through it by using the strongest attacks or running from battle. But here you have to actively solve a puzzle under a time pressure. Some solutions are basic and easily identified the moment the battle starts, but some of these can be tough. You can't just turn your brain off to do a battle. And for some people who aren't good at this kind of puzzle, or puzzles in general, this can be a deal breaker. I was worried about this battle system going in. I wasn't sure if I'd like it or not. I'm not much of a puzzle guy in general, so there was a possibility this wouldn't click with me, and that could have brought the game down significantly, but I had a pretty alright time with it. I don't love it, but I surprisingly didn't really get tired of it my whole playthrough. It was only in the final 2 chapters where the puzzles were getting their hardest that I kept relying more and more on paying off toads to get a move on. But even then, it never got to the point of Sticker Star or Color Splash where I actively avoided battles and would run away from any I accidentally got in. I wouldn't want this battle system to come back even if there are aspects that could be improved, but I don't hate it, and it didn't bring down the game like Color Splash. So yeah, despite the flaws, this is easily the best battle system of the new Paper Mario games, though that's not saying much. So the prologue of this game is a bit longer than the last few games, maybe even the longest depending on where you think it ends. As mentioned, the chapters aren't labeled, and that includes the prologue. You have the whole bit where you investigate the castle and get thrown off and land in the Whispering Woods. This area is a pretty basic tutorial area, though a lot better paced than the Goomba Road in 64. After that, you get back to Toad Town, the main town of the game, though you still have to clear the place out. This is where you're introduced to a special enemy type, the Flesh Golems. They work differently from other enemies because you don't go into battle with them. You fight them in the overworld. There are different kinds of them that act a bit differently, but for all of them you bait an attack, dodge, hit the stickers on them until they are all gone, then you're free to just attack them until they explode. There's not really much to these enemies. As much as I'd advocate for Sticker Star and Color Splash to not have turn-based combat, and instead just fight enemies in the overworld, that was only in comparison to their awful battle systems. The way these games play doesn't lend to interesting overworld combat. They aren't bad by any means, but they just kind of exist as a strange standout element of this game. But Toad Town is full of these things, and you'll need to clear them out. You'll also have to go through Graffiti Underground to investigate the castle grounds first. We're still in the prologue, but eventually Toad Town will start acting like a functional town again. Toad Town, unlike every previous town, is fully contained in one loading zone. It's not divided into sections. This is a pretty big area, so there are warp pipes around to get from one end to another. In terms of important things in town, most of it is lined up in the southern part of town. Here you have the museum, weapons shop, battle lab, and a few houses to the left is an accessory shop. There's a dock which you use to access the Great Sea, and hidden near it is a special shop for buying boss treasures. I'll go over what all this stuff is in a bit. The rest of the town is just to make it seem like a town. Houses that are just houses. And as you progress, more and more toads will populate the place. There's this toad who will help you find any HP up hearts you missed, just kinda chilling here. And on the northern end of town is a cafe that sells rapid espresso that increases your speed briefly. It doesn't last very long, so it's kinda pointless. It's just for walking around town faster. They also sell turtle tea, which slows you down, which is entirely pointless. Not sure why it's here, I guess as a joke. Aside from using the shops and museum, there's not a lot to do in town after you've cleared it out the first time. There are collectibles around to find, so it kind of is a level more so than a town, at least in the same sense of towns like 64's Toad Town or Rogueport. There's hardly any story-related events or quests you need to do in town at any point past the first visit. This does fit this game's structure more than it would otherwise. The main thing you'll need to return to town for is the museum, but before talking about that, we need to talk about collectibles. There's a variety of collectibles throughout the game. In fact, this is the most collectible-focused game in the series. Other games had things to collect, but there was never really an emphasis on getting everything. There wasn't convenient tracking on star pieces or badges, and the whole catch card thing in Super was just a nightmare. Sticker Star and Color Splash had tracking of sorts, but only Color Splash did it well by actually giving you a percentage of colorless spots per level, and this toad that told you where to find the last remaining cutout locations. In Origami King, in addition to having more things to collect, each one is given a percentage of how many you've gotten per area that you can easily check on your map. The most common collectibles are toads. Yeah, you're now collecting them. All throughout the game, toads are in various forms of trouble. Oftentimes they're folded into some object like vases, plants, or animals like bugs, dogs, and fish. This will really require you to pay attention to the environment to spot them. They can be really well hidden. A lot of the general gameplay involves searching for toads. They're everywhere, and they can be pretty satisfying to find. The toads you save usually continue to occupy the area you find them in, which makes the area feel more like an actual place and gives good visual feedback for how you're making things better. And the ones that don't stay will go to Toad Town, so you're constantly seeing your progress as you go back to town. Toads can also give you rewards, including HP up hearts. These are back to being collectibles you can find rather than just given after a boss. They also vary in how much health they give you instead of a set amount every time. Another major collectible are what the game calls not bottomless holes. They're just holes in the environment torn out by the flesh golems. This has some implications on what this world is. There's just an empty void underneath everything except those metal bits holding it up. You can fall in these as well, and it does hurt. These holes are pretty much the colorless spots from Color Splash, but not as interesting. Because they are big chunks of the level ripped out, they are pretty obvious and hard to miss. Sometimes they can be cleverly hidden, or you might overlook one, but most of the time you just see them immediately. The colorless spots were also largely obvious, but there were quite a few that were pretty well hidden. There isn't a single hole in this game that is as hidden as this one in Indigo Underground, or this one in Green Energy Plant. But even if they aren't as well hidden, they don't take away anything because they aren't the only major collectible. It's not like the game lacks a good sense of exploration. These are the easy collectibles. Now to repair a hole, you fill it in with the flesh of your enemy. Confetti. Confetti replaces paint, but they are only used for filling holes, nothing else. You have a limited supply of confetti, but you can very easily get more by hitting things in the environment or defeating enemies. You rarely will be in a position where you're out of confetti, and the times you are intentional to gate you from advancing and make you fight enemies. Also, you don't lose any of the confetti you throw unless it fills a hole, so you don't have to worry about wasting any. Weirdly, after you beat a boss, you get an upgrade to your confetti supply, which cool I guess, but there's not much to this mechanic, that it's not very exciting. Honestly, I don't know what the point of this mechanic is. I think the holes are a fine enough collectible, but having a separate resource for it, and only it, is kind of pointless. Oh well, it doesn't really detract from the game, and I guess it adds another incentive to fight enemies, even if it's not necessary most of the time. The other collectibles are treasures and hidden question mark blocks. Treasures are these figurines of various objects and characters. There's a lot of these and are simple enough to find. Most of the time they're in chests that you can find just through exploration, though they can also be given to you by NPCs as a reward, and you can buy others in some shops. The question mark blocks are exactly what you'd expect. You hit them and get money and weapons, but unlike the last two games, they don't refill after leaving the area. A lot of these are invisible, and sometimes there are environmental clues to help locate them, but more often than not, you'll have to guess or use a couple other means to find them. There are a bunch of shops throughout the game. Most of the time they just sell weapons, which is very helpful to stay up to date on the strongest ones, but there are other things to buy as well. Some items can be pretty expensive, which offsets the absurd amount of money you get. Yeah, you get absolutely showered in coins in this game, even more so than Color Splash, and this game doesn't even have Rochambeau. The first battle gave me 500 coins. You can get 1,000 coins from a hidden block. Money is everywhere in this game. They added an extra 0 to your wallet, and you will easily use it up. But you actually need all these coins to buy stuff that's actually worth buying. The game has the best economy since the Thousand-Year Door. You finally have a reason to get money. And coins being the only reward for fighting enemies is enough to make them worth it. The main things you'll want to save your money for are accessories. You can equip accessories which will have different effects. They're kinda like badges again, though there are far fewer of them. The accessories are divided between 5 groups. You can only have 1 from each group selected at a time, with the exception of the bigger group on the right where you can have 2 on at a time. The one on the right has various general accessories. Some are cosmetic, like the one that changes your confetti to flower petals, or one that changes sound effects. There's one that lets you collect confetti from farther away, which I guess is fine before you have something better to replace it with. The best ones are the ones that increase the damage your partner does, and the one that passively gives you 10,000 coins whenever you step 10,000 times. As if you didn't get enough money in this game, just randomly you'll get an extra 10,000. There's also a membership card which gives you a discount at shops, which is obviously useful but easy to forget to put on before buying things. One weird thing is that there are 3 tiers to this, and each one you get replaces the last one, but other accessories don't work like that. For the other groups of accessories, 3 of them are specifically for battling. One increases your health, another reduces the damage you take when you successfully block, and the last adds more time on your turn to solve the puzzle. Each of these have 3 tiers, where the higher tiers are just upgrades. But they don't replace the previous tiers like the membership card. There's no reason to use the lower tier, so I'm not sure why they're grouped like this. It makes it look like there are more accessories than there actually are, which maybe is the reason. There are a lot of aspects to this game that are baby steps back to what the first 2 games did. Maybe this is another one. They heard that people want badges back, so they just added these as a baby step, and grouped them like this to make it look more impressive than it really is. Who knows, but it's weird. Anyways, the final group of accessories are all about helping you find collectibles. There's one for toads, treasure, and question mark blocks. There isn't one for holes, but I guess they figured they were pretty obvious and you didn't need one. When you get close enough to the collectible, a bell will ring. It doesn't tell you exactly where it is, but it is very helpful for finding the last few collectibles, especially the blocks. These accessories are nice to have, and some are pretty useful, but they are so pared back from the badge system of the first 2 games. I guess I am glad to have some baby steps rather than none at all. Shortly into Chapter 1, you run into this toad who will give you new items that you can use in the overworld periodically throughout the game. They all have a limited battery that, if runs out, need to be recharged back here. One is the lamination suit, which makes you invisible. I never really used it, I just fought all the enemies. And the others are a toad radar and a hidden block on hider. Both of these will point you in the direction of the nearest toad or hidden block. There is a distance limit, but it is much farther than the bell accessories. These can be quite helpful in finding the last few collectibles if the accessories aren't helpful enough. This is a bit redundant, but it is nice for the hidden blocks, as even if you know one is nearby, they're invisible, so it can still be a pain to find the exact location, and this helps. Weirdly, there isn't one for treasures. Not sure why. The museum returns for a 3rd time, or should I say, the Musée Champignon. and it's the best incarnation. While it was very satisfying filling out previous ones, they contribute to a lot of the problems of those games, especially Sticker Star with the sheer amount of backtracking it added. In those games, you put your stickers and cards in the museum, which were your attacks in battle, so you had to give them up as well as physically go to the museum to manually place them. For Origami King, anything that would go in the museum goes there as soon as you've collected or encountered it. You also don't put your weapons in it so you don't have the issue of giving up powerful weapons. The contents of the museum are enemy displays, which update as you encounter them, though since they're grouped by what streamer they're found in, enemies like Goombas that appear in multiple chapters have multiple entries for each chapter. There's also origami toads. You get to see all the different things toads are folded into, and similarly to the enemies, they are grouped by chapter. There's an art gallery with a bunch of concept art that you unlock by saving more toads. They're kind of treated like currency, weirdly. There's some cool stuff in here. I find the progression for the designs for the developmentals to be pretty interesting. And geez, they went through a lot of designs for Origami Peach. And again, some more unique character designs that would have been nice if they were in the game. Anyways, next is a sound gallery to listen to the music. You unlock more of these as you fill in the not bottomless pits. There are a couple of blank canvases that will record the biggest cheep and blooper you've caught in the fishing minigames. There are a few of these and they're pretty simple. Cast out your line, wait for them to bite, and reel in. You'll only need to do this for some collectibles and to catch the biggest fish for the museum. And the main gallery is the treasure room. This is where all those treasures you collect go, but you can also unlock trophies for accomplishing certain tasks. These take the place of the flags of the last two games, and have some similar requirements to get. You have ones for filling out each of the galleries, collecting the biggest cheep and blooper, winning 200 battles, hitting every question mark block, and collecting 300,000 coins. 300,000 coins does sound like a lot, but just like Color Splash, you get showered in coins. But there are some more trophies for completing specific challenges throughout the game. Basically, all the minigames you'll play along the way have a trophy tied to getting a certain score or collecting all the coins. On the way to Shogun Studios, you have this rafting minigame in Eddy River. You simply are trying to avoid all the obstacles to get to the end. It's not too hard, it's pretty generous with health pickups. You just have to make sure you get all the holes along the way. There's also a bunch of coins, and you get a trophy for collecting them all. It can be tough, especially when you reach a decline and have to jump for them, but it's not unreasonable. Within Shogun Studios is the Shuriken minigame. It's just hitting targets to get a better score. You get a trophy for getting 100 points. Again, not too hard, but may take a few attempts. But in the Great Sea, there's Scuffle Island. Here you'll have to fight 7 rounds of flesh golems. Each round you earn more and more coins, but if you die you don't get any money. Winning all 7 rounds earns you the trophy. This can be a bit of a pain to do. It's an endurance test. None of them are difficult by themselves once you know their patterns, but surviving the whole thing is where the challenge is. You do get some health back after rounds, but you can't save them for when you need them as they'll despawn. Near the museum is the battle lab where you can practice action commands and refight bosses. But more importantly, this is where the ring trainer is. The ring trainer has 2 modes, the ringer and speed rings. These let you practice ring puzzles. The ringer has 3 levels with 10 puzzles each, and you have to solve them as fast as you can. Though if you're just trying to beat it for the trophy, you can take your time. Speed rings, however, gives you 100 seconds to do as many puzzles as you can. The puzzles you get are randomized, so you have to learn the solutions and solve them quickly. Getting the trophy for this requires you to clear 16 puzzles in the time limit, which is not easy. This took some doing to complete. You really need to practice enough to know what the solutions are as soon as you see the layout. And the last trophy has to do with Shy Guy's finish last, which I'll go over when I talk about that. So the museum is much better than the previous ones, and it is actually more satisfying to complete because it doesn't actively introduce more problems like all the backtracking in Sticker Star and the grinding in Color Splash. But there's still more to completion, finding all the collectibles, filling out the museum, getting all the trophies. That, in addition to adding Olly and Olivia to the Origami Castle in the ending, will give you a star on your save file. I don't have footage of it because it only happens after beating the game, and you can't complete the museum until post-game. And I didn't want to fight the final boss again for a star on my file. That star is one of 3 badges you can get on your file. The other 2, however, are permanently missable. For one of them, you have to beat the game without dying once. The game isn't super hard, but it's a long time to not make any mistake that could kill you, especially when there are times you can die instantly. But then there's the last one, and this one is really stupid. So I was playing the game in a call with friends, and seemingly at random, one of them who knew about this just said, "You've now locked yourself out of 100% completion." And I'm just kinda baffled, like, I didn't do anything. What I did was equip an accessory. The last badge is for beating the game without using any accessory. And why? Why have a mechanic and then tell you that you can't use it? It actively makes the game less interesting and less fun to not use accessories. Imagine if to complete the 1,000-year door you couldn't use any badges or partners. Mechanics that greatly enhance the game and are a big part of why that game is so good. It makes the game worse to not use them. Sure, it can be fun to have some self-imposed restrictions for a challenge run, but that's all that should be. It shouldn't be required for completion. As far as I know, there's nothing in the game that tells you or even hints about the existence of these. And the only reason I knew about it in the first place is because a friend told me about it. So honestly, just ignore them. Look, I'm a completionist. I like fully completing games. But sometimes it's not worth it. Sometimes trying to complete a game will harm the experience. This is something you should only ever try if you already love the game and want to challenge yourself. Otherwise, it's just gonna make the game worse for you, so don't bother. The structure of this game is back to that of the first two games, more or less. While it doesn't label them as chapters, the game follows the chapter structure of them. The game has clear divides. You go to an area, solve the problems with it, destroy the streamer there, and move on to the next area. Gone are the world maps and level selections of Sticker Star and Color Splash. You want to go somewhere, you have to walk, or use the very convenient warp room. The main difference between this and the first two games is that, for the most part, progression is a straight line. You go from Picnic Road directly to Autumn Mountain, then from there directly to Sandpaper Desert. From the Great Sea, you go directly to Shangri Spa, directly to Bowser's Castle, directly to King Olly's Castle. There's not really a need to go back to Toad Town. In the first three games, you reach each chapter through their main town, often having to interact with the town itself or the residents to get there. So the towns were very important the whole game. Here, the only reason to go back to Toad Town is checking your collectibles or accessing the warp room. Now, there are a couple exceptions. While Autumn Mountain leads to Sandpaper Desert, you need to take a detour to the Great Sea to get Bobby's fuse, which you get to from Toad Town. And obviously, when it's time to tackle the Great Sea, you need to go back to Toad Town again. Sandpaper Desert is a dead end. This is a big reason why the towns of the first three games were so much better and more memorable than the newer ones. You had to interact with them in between each chapter. You had to talk to the residents and help solve their issues. They were true hubs for the entire game, rather than a place you sometimes went back to for putting collectibles in the museum and not much else. There's still no side quest system, so even the optional reasons to go back are limited. Backtracking has been a consistent issue in the series, Sticker Star being the absolute worst of them. Color Splash has some moments, but nothing too bad that it's a notable problem. Well, other than having to keep going to a level to get a paint star to reset Rochambeau a million times because it sucks. Now, there might be some concern of backtracking in Origami King as it's structured more like the first two games instead of having a world map you can use to fast travel, but fear not, because this is the only game in the series with zero backtracking issues. Anything you would backtrack for is optional, and even for that stuff, it's not a problem to go back. The level design isn't restrictive like 1,000-Year Door, so avoiding enemies is easy. But the biggest thing is, in the museum there's a warp room with pipes leading to each chapter. While in the chapters, you'll find one of these pipes taped shut, so simply unblock it and you can warp back to Toad Town. This is like the warp rooms in the first two games, but actually designed well. Instead of 64 where you had multiple rooms with unlabeled pipes you had to remember where they took you, or 1,000-Year Door where you had 2 rooms with only 4 warps that didn't include Glitzville, Twilight Town, Far Outpost, or the X-Naut base, so you still had to go out of your way to get to their proper entrances, which made General White more tedious than it needed to be. You have all 6 chapter pipes in one room, clearly labeled and color-coded, which makes it very convenient to travel to where you need to go. And if that wasn't enough, outside the museum is another pipe that takes you to Picnic Road, right in front of the sensor lab. And in here you can use the fax machine to warp you to any of the other satellite offices after you've uncovered them. And there's one for each chapter except the final one. Using a fax machine to warp is a pretty clever idea, but it brings up some concerns. Fax machines scan paper and a copy is printed elsewhere. What does this imply when a person made of paper uses it? Is the Mario that is printed a clone? If so, what happens to the original? Oh god, we've got the teleporter problem. Do you die when you teleport and the one who is left is just a copy of the original? Wait, but it's worse here because it's a fax machine. The original version shouldn't get destroyed unless... Well, moving past the existential dread of the concept of teleporters and the endless body horror of this game, you have two methods of getting to each chapter, all easily accessible to you at all times. And with the pause menu having maps of each location, with each specific area marked with its own percentages for each collectible, it's easy to know where you need to go if you missed anything. And with the accessories and equipment you get to help find them, backtracking for collectibles is no problem. This game gives you the sense of an interconnected world like the first two games, and arguably better, while also making backtracking a simple and easy process. We did it! We have a Paper Mario game without a backtracking problem. So the level design itself is pretty similar to Color Splash, just all connected instead of being separated with a map. Just like Color Splash, individual rooms can be pretty big. Actually, these can be huge, way bigger than Color Splash. I already mentioned how all of Toad Town was just in a single screen, and it's bigger than most, if not all, screens in the previous games. And it's not even the biggest one. Shogun Studios is a huge area with so much in it. All the towns are on one screen, which was a rarity in the older games, only reserved for the smallest ones. And the areas in general are pretty big and sprawling. Like, Picnic Road is really big, same with Autumn Mountain. And just a lot of areas are pretty sizable. Not that there aren't any smaller areas, but the level design tends to lean on the bigger side, especially outdoor areas. This game really feels like it has a big scope because of this. And the bridge thing that would signal a transition point between rooms is gone. A bit sad, but now the different rooms feel more literally connected. The level design is pretty open, but it doesn't feel empty at any point. Even the widest areas do feel like they justify the space. This makes avoiding enemies on backtracks easier, but still not trivial. Though because the combat isn't bad, the enemies don't take away from the level design anymore. And you can still defeat enemies on the field without entering battle when you've upgraded your health enough. Color Splash did have some good level design, but because the combat was terrible, every enemy makes navigating the levels much more annoying. That's not a problem here. I never felt like the levels were dragging or draining because of the combat. So I think we finally have a Paper Mario game where I can unambiguously and with no caveats say has rather good level design. It has all the strengths of Color Splash, plus some of its own merits and improvements without the issues. Well, there is still one issue. We once again don't have any real extensions to your moveset or abilities. Even though you do have partners, they don't give you any field moves, so they don't contribute to the level design. Well, okay, except for Dusty. You can have him dig, which is used to uncover coins or other stuff, mostly used on these lit up spots. This is nice and helpful for grinding coins if you're short, but it's not really used for much else. Once again, you interact with the world by simply moving, jumping, and using your hammer. The one extra ability you get is the Thousand-Fold Arms. The Thousand-Fold Arms is this game's equivalent to Paperization and Cutout from the previous games, but it's even less substantial. One plus is that it's activated on magic circles, which means you don't have to guess where it might be used, but it also makes it restrictive. I mean, Paperization and Cutout were also restrictive, but they could have tried to expand the concept of interacting with the terrain. But I guess they just decided to be honest with the mechanic for once. So you activate it on a magic circle, then move your arms around to find an area to peel or hit, and then you do so, and that's about it. There's not much to this mechanic, even less so than the previous incarnations. Kinda wonder why it's even in the game. Well, it does get a lot more use in boss fights, but outside of that, yeah, it's a pretty nothing mechanic. Oh, and there's also the elemental powers, which you just activate the magic circle and watch a cutscene. There's some puzzle solving with them, but it's very basic and doesn't add much. So for the chapters themselves, there's not a lot to go over with Chapter 1. Honestly, this game doesn't put a very strong foot forward. Chapter 1 is pretty weak, easily the worst chapter, which is a good sign, it only goes up from here. But as a first impression, this chapter doesn't do much. There's no gimmicks or extra mechanics or anything really, it's just the normal gameplay, which as we've established is very simple in the overworld. The Elemental Temples are introduced here, there are 4 of them. This and the next 3 chapters have their own. They're all based around their elements and play out like typical dungeons. The Water Temple is all about moving water to open up the way forward. The Fire Temple is mostly just avoiding fire obstacles with a few on-field combat encounters. And the Ice Temple is mostly block sliding puzzles. These are alright and can have some neat stuff in them, but the chapters around them tend to be more interesting. In Chapter 1 there's the Earth Elemental Temple. It's the simplest one and doesn't offer much in terms of puzzles, mostly just basic platforming and navigation. You don't get a partner for this chapter, so that can't help make what you're doing more interesting. You're just going around helping toads, finding these orbs to get into the Earth Elemental Temple, doing that, then heading to the tower, which also doesn't have much going on for it. It isn't bad by any means, it just doesn't do much and is pretty forgettable. Chapter 2 does pick up a lot though. It's a contender for the best chapter, though a lot of that has to do with Bobby. The gameplay is still simple, but the level design is more interesting and there are more set pieces like Bobby getting knocked off this bridge and you have to follow him down here and have to work your way back up. You also have this river rafting minigame I already talked about that bridges the first part of the level to Shogun Studios. And this place is an open space with plenty of exploration to find the items necessary to progress. And the ninja attraction where you have to navigate traps while finding all the ninja toads. And this is where you get the 3 masks that stay in your inventory the entire game. The Goomba one has a couple of uses, but I'm severely disappointed that the Donkey Kong mask has no use the entire game. Anyways, you need to use the Goomba mask to sneak past all these enemies to get into the theater. And in here, a few plays are happening that you take a part in. It's just a few minigames, but they're still fun and the presentation is great. This is where you get the Birdo cameo. One of 3 actually, once in the pond in the beginning of the game, and there's a cafe much later in the game that has another one where she sings. But this appearance is much more involved than the cameos in Sticker Star and Color Splash, as she's one of the actors. It's actually pretty cool. Transphobes stay mad at Birdo winning. She still doesn't give you a goat though. Chapter 2 is quite a step up from the first. This is where the game really gets going. This is the only chapter to have an epilogue. After dealing with the rubber band, you head off to chapter 3, but before you get there, Olly crushes Olivia and blocks the way with the giant boulder. So you take a detour to the Great Sea, getting a preview of Chapter 4, and head to the Princess Peach. The ship, that is. This acts as another dungeon, though it's not too complicated, mostly there for the atmosphere and mystery of what happened to this place and Bobby. Chapter 3 is the other contender for the best chapter. It doesn't have the emotional journey with Bobby, but it does have a boot car. After you cheered up Olivia, you continue down the tunnel and get a boot car. While in it, you move much faster and can defeat enemies without going into battle, if you're moving fast enough. You also can call it back to you at any time if you get too far away from it. You're going to use this to travel through the desert, as it is pretty big, so the speed is needed. The desert is broken up into a few rooms with some landmarks here and there, and of course Sniff City. You'll mainly be exploring the desert first to find Dusty, then using him to translate some ancient text to give you clues on how to activate these towers needed to uncover the Temple of Shrooms. Exploration is the main focus of this chapter, as you use your boot to traverse the desert, and it is pretty satisfying doing so. Sniff City also has plenty to do, but my favorite part of it is this stand with a lamp on top with a green L on it. You get a chance to win 10,000 coins if you manage to guess the Sniffet's mood. It is just luck as far as I can tell, but it's not too tedious to keep trying. It's not Rochambeau. And if you lose and don't try again, you lose your freedom and get sucked into the big lamp, and then a big M appears on it next to the L. Luigi got trapped in here before you, and it's hilarious. I miss these game over moments from the first 3 games. Man, this is way better than Dry Desert in 64. You have actual wide open spaces instead of small, nearly identical rooms. But because of the boot car, it's never tedious getting around. And there's actual stuff to find unlike most of the rooms in Dry Desert, so exploring it is fun. The Switch has been great for deserts. Between this, Toast Arena and Mario Odyssey, and Gerudo Desert in Zelda, deserts are finally getting good. I notice how all 3 give you a ride to travel fast across the open sand. Desert levels don't have to suck. When done right, they are one of my favorite themes. Anyways, once you get to the Temple of Shrooms, it's a pretty straightforward dungeon until you get to the end where you have to round up all the faceless toads with the music and make your way back. This is a great chapter. The only reason it's not definitively ahead of Chapter 2 is because it had Bobby. But we're back to having Chapter 3 being one of, if not the best chapter in the game. It is a real Paper Mario game. Chapter 4 is Wind Waker. Like literally, it's just a mini Wind Waker. You're on a boat and you can sail anywhere on the Great Sea and explore the many islands to find 3 keys to get into this tower. Much like Chapter 3, this is heavily exploration focused, but this time you have an entire ocean to explore. You first have to get to this specific island, which you can only get to after recruiting Captain T.O.'d to get rid of all the fog covering the sea. After that, it's just a matter of sailing in whatever direction you want and exploring the various islands. Each island has some small challenge to complete, whether it's rescuing some toads or solving a puzzle. Some islands have these statues that help point you in the direction you need to go. It's still just Wind Waker. Like, look at your sea chart. This is Wind Waker. You even get locations for treasure put on your map for finding some toads. You can use T.O.'d submarine to scavenge for loot at the bottom of the ocean, which you'll need to do to find the Diamond Island. Those statues were hinting towards Diamond Island, and eventually you get a key to it, but it's underwater. In here, you have the Ice Elemental Temple, and 3 trials you need to complete for the keys to the Sea Tower. Each trial is basically a different minigame. The Trial of Wisdom is just answering some questions, nothing complicated there. The Trial of Courage Edge is basically a game of chicken. You have to stop a falling object after it's past the arrow but before it hits you. This can be pretty tricky, the third one especially gives you barely any wiggle room. When you fail you have to start over from the beginning, which is annoying, but after a couple failed attempts you are given the option to pay 3,000 coins to make it easier. And the Trial of Power, yeah, this is all one big Zelda reference. This is the Wind Waker chapter. But the Trial of Power has you breaking blocks within the time limit. Simple enough at first, but then you need to start to swing your hammer like in battle with action commands. So you better be good at those. Thankfully this isn't Sticker Star where there's no visual for the best outcome. But then there's the Sea Tower, which is essentially a gauntlet of all 4 elemental temples and their gimmicks. There's a lot in this chapter, and while I still prefer the previous 2 chapters, this is still a rather good one. It's a small version of the best part of Wind Waker without the tedious parts. Yes, the Triforce Hunt is the best part of Wind Waker. Being able to freely explore the sea with no restrictions is what the whole game should have been. I will accept no criticism. Chapter 5 isn't the most standout overall with its gameplay. The goal is to go to each springs across Shangri Spa to restore Bowser Jr. before you can storm Bowser's castle. You have the center area and a bunch of branching paths to get to the springs. A couple of them are pretty easy to get, but then there's the one in the jungle which you really go out of your way to get. The jungle is pretty linear with some branching paths. Some paths lead to an instant game over if you run into this chain chomp flesh golem, but eventually you make it and bring Junior back, until he stays in too long and loses his color. Too bad Huey isn't here or we could just paint him ourselves. Now you need to get to the Spring of Rainbows, which after shimmying across a windy ledge, it's time for the game show. So, Sniff It or Whiff It has been retired. It kinda seemed like that was the new game show gag, but it's not here. I could have sworn there would have been one in Sniff City. Like, this is the perfect place for it. But nope. Instead, we have Shy Guys finish last. This is set up like your typical game show that has multiple categories with different difficulty levels. There are 4 categories with 3 tiers each. You don't get to choose which. They are selected at random. First is Ring Scramble. All of these will involve the ring mechanics. You have a picture on the rings that scrambles up and you have to put it back to how it started under a time limit, and with limited moves. This one is pretty easy. Levels 1 and 2 are just freebies, and while level 3 can be intimidating, it isn't too tough, and all of these are consistent, so once you learn how to do it, you can just do it every time. Race in Place has 4 characters racing, and you have to memorize the order they all finish the race. Level 1 is easy, you just have to select the one who finishes first. You use the rings to place them. Level 2 is trickier, as the one you need to place can be any of them other than the one in first. And for level 3, you have to order all 4 of them, which isn't too hard to memorize but still requires effort. Although you can cheese this by taking a screenshot, which I did abuse a lot. Next is Ninja Skills. You'll have a bunch of characters on the rings that get covered up and shuffled around, and you need to keep track of the ninjas and select them. Level 1 is simple, you only have 1 ninja to track. Level 2 is trickier as you have 2 ninjas to track. This can be pretty tough, but I found it helpful to keep pointing at the right ones. Though it can get disorienting when the line they're on moves, making them go to the opposite side. Level 3 looks really intimidating as you have 4 ninjas to track, but it isn't much more complicated than level 2 as you just need to track the 2 that aren't ninjas. Just make sure you remember the ones you're tracking are the wrong answers. Level 3 is still harder though as they get scrambled for longer, so you really need to pay attention and stay focused. And the final category is Bath Math. Oh boy. So you have to count the Goombas in the pool. The answer is how many are in when time runs out. Goombas will keep coming in and leaving, so you have to keep adding and subtracting. It's not too hard to keep track of it for the first 2 levels. But level 3 adds steam that covers the bath after a few seconds, so you can only keep track of the ones coming in and leaving. You can't recount the ones already in. Still not too hard, but the annoying thing is how you input the answer. You don't simply just say there are this many Goombas, you have to make an equation where the answer is the number you want. And you have to use up all 4 tiles. So it's always a double-digit number plus or minus a single-digit number. You can't do 8 plus 6 to make 14. You have to do something like 13 plus 1 or 16 minus 2. On top of that, you have a time limit, and this might not seem so bad, but I'm slow with math. It can sometimes take a second for me to math out even something simple, but here you're working backwards, and it has to take up 4 panels. There were times I did come up with the correct solution pretty fast, but forgot it needed 4 panels, and by the time I realized my mistake, it was too late to figure out a new equation that would fit. So I ended up taking a screenshot of the ring so I could look at what numbers there were and make an equation at my own pace. It's not like it really invalidates the challenge. I still had to keep track of the Goombas to make sure I had the right answer, and you can't cheese level 3 by screenshotting. But anyways, each challenge gives you a set amount of points depending on what level it is, and you only need 100 points to win and continue. But there is a bonus sudden death round. If you fail, you die. So they play one of the songs from earlier in the game, the ones with lyrics even though there's no actual vocals, and they omit one word and you have to remember what it is and use the rings to lead Olivia to the right answer. This is a bit of a cheap shot, like who would even remember these? You can still guess, it's not too hard, and it's free if you do know or got it right once. But that's not it. For there is also the perfect game. After beating it once, you can try for a perfect game where you have to beat every single challenge, including sudden death. Most of the challenges aren't hard, but the ones that really make you pay attention and you can't cheese with screenshots like Ninja Skill and Bath Math level 3 certainly add on pressure. This took a couple attempts, and the one where I won, I almost lost right at the end. Of course, it took until the literal last one to be Bath Math level 3, and of course that would be the time I lost count of the Goombas. But I had seen a Reddit post about this where someone said that usually the answer for this was either 17 or 21, and it felt like too many Goombas went in for it to be 17, so I guessed 21, and got it. Thankfully that post was correct, otherwise I would have been pissed. Anyways, your reward for doing the perfect game is the last trophy I mentioned. Shy Guys Finish Last is a cool expansion on the game shows, though having to use the ring mechanics can be kind of annoying for selecting the answer and it complicates it more than it should, but otherwise it's fun. It's certainly better than Color Splashes, though I'm still not sure if it beats the original Sniffit or Whiffit from Sticker Star. Something about that one just felt more interesting, especially the part where it combined a whack-and-mole and trivia. But bringing it back to Shangri Spa, after helping Bowser Jr., you and all of Bowser's minions storm his castle to take it back. This is a pretty small area, so there's not a lot going on, though there is a lot of combat as you help Bowser's minions fight off the Origami soldiers. There is this one puzzle that you're supposed to do after rescuing Bowser, but you can set it up before that point, so later it just gets instantly solved. Next, you board Bowser's airship to bring the fight to Olly and have a turret section. It's a pretty easy but fun minigame, though you use bombs as ammo and oh, this doesn't feel right. Imagine being a bomb prepared to die to help Bowser, and you're one of the ones that misses. After crashing, you have this sequence of escaping the volcano while being chased by a bunch of flesh golems, and Kamek and Bowser Jr. help out, but get left behind. It's a really cool set piece, but afterwards, all that's left is King Olly's castle. Nothing much to say here. Just like previous games, it's one big dungeon that utilizes all your abilities, and has a lot of combat. There's some pretty good puzzles and set pieces throughout, such as this bridge that keeps getting flipped around by the Sumo Bro, or this big room that has a bridge bent so you have to go around to get through and fix the bridge. The 1000-fold arms gets a lot of use here, even having this puzzle where you need to figure out how to form a pathway by hitting these blocks. Probably the best use of this mechanic out of battle. This is honestly a very solid lineup of chapters, and one of the most consistent. The only weak link is chapter 1, and it's just kind of okay. The rest just have a lot going for them, with hardly any problems. But now for the bosses. Unlike every other game in the series, the bosses have completely different battle mechanics. This is very strange, but it does make sense since the normal battle system is built around large groups of enemies, so fighting a single big enemy wouldn't work so well. You still use the rings to fight them, but this time the boss is in the middle of the rings while you are on the outside. Instead of lining up the enemies, you are trying to position yourself to hit the boss. Across the rings are various panels and objects that do different things. Arrows will make you move in that direction until running into a different arrow or the inner edge. You will need to have an arrow right in front of Mario, otherwise you won't move at all, wasting your turn. Though I guess that's a way to have a do-nothing command. There are attack panels where when landed on you attack like you normally would in normal battles, though your distance from the boss does matter. You want to be in the 2 inner rings to use a hammer. There are 2 power-up panels that, when you pass them, will give you an extra attack or double your damage. And you can have both at the same time. There are hints you can get, which are helpful, though you can only get them once you've already started moving, so depending on what you're doing, the hint could advise you against something you're in the middle of doing. Chests will add more items like health and power-up panels, or any other type of panel to the rings, which is helpful, and sometimes necessary. And most importantly, the magic circle panels. There's one for 1000-fold arms, and each of the elementals, each of them having a specific attack. Though to use the magic circles, you must pass an on switch to activate them. If you hit an on switch but don't use a magic circle that turn, they stay activated next turn, which can be very useful. So generally what you do in these bosses is you create a path with the arrows to make Mario run into an attack space or magic circle to deal damage to the boss at an appropriate time. The position you end up in relation to the boss does matter. Some bosses have weak points in specific places, so just putting an attack panel right in front of you isn't going to do much most of the time. You also only have 3 moves to set up a path, and you still are under time pressure. You can still ask Olivia for hints, which still pauses everything, but it's not as helpful here compared to normal battles because of the camera and the boss will block part of the board. And you can still pay Toads to help you out by giving you an arrow that shows you your current path. I actually enjoy the boss mechanics more than the normal battle mechanics. I find it more interesting to path out where you want to go to get the best position to hit the boss and to get power-ups along the way, than to just simply line up enemies into the same two groups over and over again. It also helps that each boss has unique elements that change how you interact with the rings, and you have to find out the best timing to use specific attacks. You don't just run in and use the 1000-fold arms to do a ton of damage. You need to make sure you use it at the right time in the right place. I guess it's kind of like how Sticker Star and Color Splash's bosses are, where you need to wait for the optimal time to use things, but unlike those games, if you do it at the wrong time, you don't have to redo the fight. And they're a lot more satisfying to beat because of it. The first boss you fight is the Earth of Elemental. As this is also your tutorial for the boss mechanics, it's pretty simple. It's primarily teaching you that you need to go to specific places to land hits, like right on the panels in front of its legs, but also that bosses can have weak points like its tail, which you can learn about before the fight. Striking the tail opens them up to use the 1000-fold arms, which is how a lot of bosses work. Figure out their weak points and create an opening to use the 1000-fold arms to deal a lot of damage. The colored pencils is where they start toying with the rings. The colored pencils will launch missiles that will land on the rings on your turn. You can see what spots are being targeted, so now in addition to making a path to get to where you need to hit him, you have to be careful not to run into these targets. The main crux of this fight is avoiding the missiles and activating the 1000-fold arms behind him so you can close his lid and cause him to damage himself from inside. After he's stunned from his own missiles, you get some free hits, but you have to make sure to attack from the front for full damage. When he's near death, he will charge up a big attack, one where you can't just close the lid to stop. Instead, you have to grab the missiles themselves. This is still a simple fight compared to what comes later, but it already makes you interact in a new way with the rings that normal battles do not do. The Water Elemental creates water spouts in the inner circle. During your turn, they will wash away anything in the columns that they're connected to, meaning you have to account for anything in their way not being there when you start moving. This fight also introduces the elemental magic circles, though you only have access to the earth one right now. Each one has a different effect. The earth one, in addition to damaging grounded enemies, raises the space you're standing on, which is used to avoid strong attacks like the Water Elemental's charge wave attack. The Water Elemental magic circle simply sprays the area with water, the fire one sets everything on fire, and the ice one freezes enemies. Simple stuff, but it's more about using them in the right time. Next is the rubber band. He'll launch rubber bands across the rings, and when you run into it, it will bounce you to whichever row it's pointing to, which adds another layer to making a path to follow. Every rubber band he shoots takes out a sliver of health away, and after your turn, he will recall any rubber band still there to get that health back. For this fight, you want to strip away the rubber bands off his body using 1000-fold arms, by literally pulling them and having them snap back. The damage you do is dependent on what row you're on. You deal more damage the farther away you are. The Fire Elemental will drop flaming feathers across the rings, and they will damage you if you touch them, so you have to be mindful to avoid them. But they also don't go away on their own, so each turn means even more spaces will damage you, and it gets harder to make a path around them. You can use the Water Elemental to douse all the feathers, but you'll want to hold off on that as long as you can, as the boss will rekindle them and gain them all back. Each feather dropped will take away a bit of his health, and when he regains them, he restores all of his health. So you want as many feathers on the field as possible, so when you douse them, the boss is weak enough to finish off with the 1000-fold arms. When I first beat this boss, I thought Mario ripped its head off. You should be getting a clear idea of how the bosses make much better use out of the ring mechanics than the normal battle system. Each boss has its own unique mechanics with how you interact with the rings, and if they don't have something specific to the rings, they have something else to spice up the battles. The hole punch will block out some tiles, so you have to go around them, but also remove parts of your body, which reduces your max health, and in addition to having to position yourself to damage him, you have to try and reclaim your parts to get your health back. The Ice Elemental freezes a bunch of panels and spins them around, so you have to find out how to make the correct path. The tape tapes up parts of the rings, making it so when you rotate a row, you may rotate 2 of them, or you won't be able to slide a column, and you need to work with that to get to the right position because you need to hit specific parts of him at the start. You see how much this battle system evolves with each fight, and it's not like there's a small number of bosses so they don't make as much use as they could. There are a lot of bosses. Most chapters have 2 bosses. Shangri Spa has 3. You have the big sumo bro, who has the smaller ones holding panels that you need to target to get those to be able to fight back, and that's in addition to them shooting electricity, limiting where you can go. And then there's the Handaconda, which starts out without any real gimmick until it changes the magic circles to, no, not again. You have to play Rochambeau with it. This is just luck. You have no idea which it will pick or whether or not you choose correctly. It's just up to luck. Rochambeau is the worst part of Color Splash. Why'd they have to bring it back? Okay, it's not so bad. If you lose a round, it attacks you. If you win a round, you get to attack. And you only need to win a couple of times. It's not like Color Splash where you have to win 3 times in a row, and if you lose once, you have to start over, which requires spending money or backtracking. And it just sucked. Here, it's fine. And I'll admit, it was pretty funny. Scissors are a bit different as it doesn't mess with the rings much other than just cutting up some of the panels. But it's no different than if they didn't appear in the first place. The scissors starts sheathed, which holds it back. If you deal enough damage to him, he will unsheath himself, but you can instead target the sheath to destroy it early. That's not really recommended because, well, we just played rock, paper, scissors, so you should know who has the advantage here. Every attack from this point on, if it lands, will instantly kill you. Also, if you attempt to jump on him, he'll counter and kill you just the same. Now you can dodge his attack. It's just the same as guarding, hit the button when he's about to hit you, and the timing is pretty generous. But it's still nerve-wracking every time he attacks. Later in the fight, he even delays his attack to throw you off, so don't get comfortable with the timing. Now, I don't think the boss being able to one-shot you is a problem. It's handled pretty well here. But I do have one issue. Right before this fight, you had another boss with no opportunity to save, so you have to refight that, which is really annoying. But after a few deaths, they will actually give you a save block in between fights, and it's like, you knew this was annoying, so why not give us the save block in the first time? Anyways, all that is left is the stapler, which is all about depleting the staples so you can attack. It doesn't really mess with the rings, so it's a bit lame, but we've already had a bunch of cool ideas. This boss lineup is great. The boss mechanics are implemented so well. They evolve and come up with new ways to interact with the rings, so each boss is unique. And the mechanics are fun and satisfying to figure out. The only weak link is the Earth Elemental, but that's just because it's tutorializing the boss mechanics. While I still prefer the bosses in Thousand Year Door, as I just like that game's battle mechanics much more and they worked well within them, Origami King easily has the second best bosses in the series. But there's still some more bosses left. 3 of the bosses are giant flesh golems, and like the normal ones, you fight them in the field rather than on the rings. These kind of play out like platformer bosses where you avoid their attacks for a bit before their weak point is exposed, allowing you to counterattack. The giant blooper is simple but fun, mostly avoiding the tentacles and shockwaves and hitting them back. The giant pokey is more interesting as you have a big area and have to use the boot car to avoid attacks. You can also lose the car, which makes the fight a lot harder, at least when you forget you have a whistle that calls it back. And the final one is the paper mistake, which is the one made of faces. This one's more projectile based and you have to dodge or attack them for the first part. Rip Kamek's face off of it, then it's more like a normal buzzy beetle flesh golem. These are neat changes of paces and are kind of fun, but not much else. And then there's King Olly himself, and he's alright. Hey, at least we don't have a bad final boss like the last 3 games. But the main issue here is that he has 3 phases, the first of which is the only one to use the rings normally, and it's just a boss rush of all the elementals. Yeah, there's nothing really added to them, it's just fighting them all in a row. I guess now instead of having different panels for each elemental, there's one that allows you to pick which one you want to use, and you can use the ice one when Olly is taking the form of the earth one, which is a little different, I guess. Otherwise, it's all the same. And it's kinda disappointing the final boss didn't have new mechanics. I'm not even opposed to him using mechanics from previous bosses. Like, what if he combined different elements from bosses to make you interact with the rings even more? Like combining the rubber bands and tape or something like that. But no, just refighting the elementals. But after that, Phase 2 has Olly and Bowser sumo wrestling, and you have to assist Bowser by getting behind him and using 1,000-fold arms to push him farther, all while avoiding getting hit yourself. And the final phase does bring the rings back, but not like the other bosses or even normal fights. It's like the matching game in Shy Guys Finish Last. You have to fix up the magic circle in time, while also dodging his attacks to fight back. You'll have to avoid his attacks with quick time events and button mashing. Then you can use the magic circle to turn Olivia into a giant hammer to finish him off. These last 2 phases are fine, there's nothing wrong with them, and have good spectacle to them. But it's kinda lame we couldn't get one last real fight with the boss ring mechanics. Oh well, it doesn't detract from the bosses as a whole, and it still is one of the better final bosses in the series. Maybe even the second best behind the Shadow Queen if I'm being honest. Well, here we are. The last Paper Mario game for now. Sure took long enough. I never envisioned this marathon lasting this long, nor did I foresee how it would end up. I started this marathon out of frustration with the direction Paper Mario had taken, but here we are. Color Splash, while still having a lot of problems, ended up being not so bad. I don't love it, but it wasn't bad. And Origami King is actually a pretty good game. It is kind of surreal saying that. While I never thought the game would be bad, and my view of it became more optimistic over time as my friends played and enjoyed the game, and having played Color Splash finally, my initial reaction to the game was still pessimistic. It's funny, well before I'd even played this game, I wrote a bit of what might have been in the conclusion for this video, about how my biggest fear with Origami King is that it would be good, because if it is good, the chances of going back to the classic style would be pretty much off a cliff. There's now a new generation of Paper Mario fans that had gotten into the series here. People are growing up with this instead of the Thousand Year Door. So if this is good, if this does well, if people like it, why go back? Now you're just alienating the new fans to go back. Just like how we were alienated with these new games. This was in the middle of the shitstorm that was the Paper Mario fandom's reaction to Origami King. Most of what I wrote had to do with the fan base and how divided they were. There's a lot that could be said about the Paper Mario fan base. And I was originally going to talk about it in this video, but as time went on, as we've gotten farther from Origami King's announcement, I've just stopped caring. It's not even really irrelevant anymore. Things are looking a bit different for the series anyways. There's also a lot to be said, and has been said countless times about how Nintendo and Intelligent Systems treat Paper Mario, but I don't have it in me to talk about that anymore. I just want to talk about the games themselves. So let's get back to the game. Origami King is a good game. I have my issues with it, but this time, they're only small. Not like Color Splash, which had big issues that couldn't be ignored. Just small stuff. The battle system has its problems, but not like Sticker Star or Color Splash where nearly everything about it was awful and severely detracted from the game. Even with the problems, it's still a good battle system. It's not what I want, but for what it is, it's good. And outside of that, there really isn't much to complain about. Some issues with the story aside, it actually tried having a story and succeeded for most of it. Sure, the ending had problems and Olly wasn't the best villain, but it doesn't ruin the story. This is a pretty good and solid game. While Thousand Year Door is and likely will always be my favorite in the series, and I still prefer 64, Origami King might just take the number 3 spot above Super. Now, Super has the better story, but the gameplay was really lacking, and I think Origami King surpassed that. They really have improved greatly from the last 2 games. And even if this isn't what I want, well, wait. Aside from the battle system, is it really something I don't want? I mean, in a lot of ways, it is going back towards the first 2 games. The interconnected world, the bigger emphasis on story, partners are kinda back. Sure, there is some stuff carried over from Sticker Star and Color Splash, but honestly, I'd say Origami King is closer to the first 2 games than it is to the last 2 in a lot of ways. Seriously, like, it really is just a few changes away from being a classic Paper Mario game. Granted, some of those changes would be pretty big, like the battle system, but it really isn't that far off. Bring the old battle system back, have more partners that stay with you the whole game, flesh out the accessories like the badges were, and add in side quests, and there you go, a classic Paper Mario game. It really isn't that far off. And yeah, the battle system is a big thing, and reverting it would require overhauling most of the game. But we're almost back. Ever since Sticker Star, we have been taking baby steps back to Thousand Year Door. In a lot of ways, they did listen. We didn't quite get there yet, but it feels like with enough time, they would have. And with recent developments making that more likely than ever, the future of Paper Mario isn't looking so bad anymore. And thus, I've gotten to the end of the Paper Mario series. Finally. This journey has been a long one I've wanted to do for a long time, one I've been working on for far longer than I initially intended. When I first started this back when Color Splash was the latest game, before I played it and assumed I wouldn't like it, before my resentment towards Sticker Star subsided, I was planning a dramatic speech about how I could no longer call myself a Paper Mario fan, that the series had changed to something I didn't like, so how could I call myself a fan of the series? And I was going to be done with the series from then on if they weren't going to go back to 64 and Thousand Year Door. Obviously, I don't stand by that anymore. I mean, 5 of the 6 games are good, or at least not bad in Color Splash's case. Funny how things can change. While I do still have concerns for the future of the series, even with recent news, I'm more optimistic than I have been for a long time for this series. I won't be full of excitement until I see a new game that has fully gone back to Thousand Year Door style, but I'm no longer pessimistic towards it. Cautiously optimistic would be accurate. But even if things don't go the way I want, at least we have alternatives. So with that, I guess I should say that, believe it or not, this marathon isn't over. There's still more to cover. And no, I'm not talking about the Thousand Year Door remake. I'll worry about how I'll handle that after it's out. There's still one last stop before I can wrap this whole journey up. Some of you already know what's coming, but for those that don't, I'll just say that when Nintendo doesn't give the fans what they want, the fans will do it themselves.
Very well. I'm the Origami Killer.
Welcome to the world of the living, clone. Don't start. I'm the original.
And it is done. Finally. Like I said, the marathon isn't quite over, but I finally covered Origami King, the last original Paper Mario game. I've been covering the series for nearly 5 years. Most of my channel's lifespan has been spent in the middle of this marathon. That's a long time, man. I want to move on. It has been kind of stressful having this marathon constantly on my shoulders, taking much longer than intended. But hopefully, having this finally out can relieve some of it. I'm still not done, but the most important videos are out. But this is where I have to apologize, because I said I was going to just focus on finishing this marathon and nothing else until it was done, which included the post-Origami King stuff. But I'm gonna have to go back on that. I'm taking another break to do other things for a while. There's a very important video that I want to make with a specific deadline. It is near the end of the year. There is plenty of time to go before that is reached, but you know how long it can take me to make videos, and I want to make certain it will be done on time. I know I'm being vague, but this video is one I really don't want to spoil. Again, this is being saved for near the end of the year. Even if I get it done far in advance, it's not going to be uploaded until the specific date I have planned. So don't expect another video this year. Yeah, I know, only 2 videos this year most likely. Maybe if I get it done really far ahead of schedule, there might be time to squeeze another small video out, but more likely I'll just get back to the next part of the Paper Mario Marathon, which will be another big video. So expect that one to take long as well. Hopefully I can finish this marathon next year so I can move on to other stuff I really want to do. I have the next bunch of videos planned out, but I have to get through this last stretch of this marathon before those. On that note, because I know you all want to know what the plan is regarding the Thousand Year Door remake, it should be obvious, but don't expect a video about it this year. As I've told everyone who asked, I'll decide how I cover it once I've played it. But my schedule's booked, so I can't make a full-on video right now. I will, however, stream my first playthrough of it. I don't know if I'll stream it day 1, but at least shortly after I have it. I also won't be following my usual stream schedule of only on Sundays. I'll just stream it every day that I am able to and Terrain is available to co-commentate. So look forward to that. I'll keep you updated on that in my community tab. But with all that out of the way, I thank you for watching, and for your extreme patience during this marathon. If you enjoy my content and think I've earned it, please support my Patreon, link in the description. And I want to thank my patrons, Enemy, Just a Blank, Kaiju, Neo, Friday, Mados Schmilmore, and Jordan Laughlin.